Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I still remember the first time I stepped into that building at night. It felt ordinary. At first, the walls needed a fresh coat of paint. The floors creaked in certain spots and the lights flickered in the corners. I was hired for a simple night shift job, mostly keeping track of who comes and goes. They told me the building had been around since the 1950s. I didn't expect anything odd. I just wanted a steady paycheck, but after a few nights I realized there was something off about the top floor. There are these long corridors that look empty, but I can't shake the feeling that someone's always there. I started hearing footsteps when I knew there was no one else inside. The cameras never show a thing. Every time I go up there, I feel like I'm being watched. It messes with my head. I remember my first shift like it was yesterday. I showed up around 700 in the evening. The guy from the previous shift gave me a quick run-through. He showed me the reception area, the security room with the camera feeds, and the stairwell that led to the higher floors. He said, "Don't worry, it's quiet here at night. Just make sure nobody sneaks in." Then he left, and I was alone. I checked all the entrances, locked the side door, and put my stuff down behind the reception desk. The first few hours were easy. Nothing happened. I listened to a late-night radio show to pass the time and occasionally looked at the screens. I saw static cameras of empty hallways, an empty lobby, and dark corridors on the upper floor. At around midnight, I decided to do my first round of the building. The owners had asked me to walk around each floor to confirm everything was secure. The elevator was old and slow, so I took the stairs. The stairwell smelled like old concrete. The metal railing rattled when I held it. The second and third floors were quiet. Nobody rented those offices at night, so I didn't expect to see anyone on the fourth floor. I started to feel this weird sense of heaviness. The air felt thick. There was a faint smell of dampness, like the walls had soaked up water over time. The lights were on, but they flickered more than in the lower floors. I didn't see anything, so I shrugged it off as my nerves. I reached the fifth floor, which is the top floor. The corridor stretched in front of me with doors on each side. Some were offices for small businesses, others were closed off. The entire hallway was silent. I listened for any sound just to make sure. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a heavy footstep behind me. It echoed off the walls. I spun around. Nobody. Nothing moved. My heart started pounding. I checked each door, tried the handles, all locked. I even called out, "Hello, anyone up here?" No response. My voice sounded hollow. It was just me and that stale air. I stood still for a moment, trying to calm down, but something felt wrong. I heard no more footsteps, so I headed back to the staircase and returned to the lobby. Once back in the security room, I looked over the camera feeds. The top floor camera showed an empty hallway, no sign of movement. I checked the timestamps. Everything matched up to when I heard the footstep. There was nothing. I started thinking, maybe I imagined it. Sometimes old buildings have weird acoustics. Maybe it was just the pipes or something shifting. I told myself that it was my first night, so my nerves were probably on edge. The second night, things got stranger. Everything was fine. Until around 1 in the morning, I was watching the cameras, sipping on some coffee, and I saw a flicker in the top floor feed. It wasn't a shape or anything I could recognize. It looked like the lights dimmed for a second, but only in that hallway. Then it went back to normal. I decided to check it out in person. I walked up the stairs again, feeling that same heaviness in the air. The smell was stronger this time, like old wet wood. I reached the fifth floor and started walking down the corridor. My flashlight beam jumped across the doors and walls. I didn't see anything unusual, but I heard that heavy footstep again. This time it sounded like it was around the corner near the storage room at the end of the hallway. I braced myself and walked toward it. My palms were sweaty and my throat felt tight. When I reached the corner, I found only the same locked door to the storage room. I rattled the handle locked. I felt a wave of cold go through me. The corridor was empty. The air felt like it was pressing down on me. I checked behind me. Nothing still. No sign of a person. I rushed back down to the security room and checked the cameras once again. No recorded movement that made me uncomfortable over the next week. The pattern continued on. Some nights I heard footsteps more than once. On others, I caught faint glimpses of something moving at the far end of the hall. It never stayed long enough for me to catch it properly. It was like a quick flicker of motion or a shadow that passed in front of the camera for a split second, but every time I played it back, the screen showed nothing. Sometimes I got the impression of a shape, but it was so quick that I thought maybe I was just tired. I tried adjusting the cameras, thinking maybe there was a blind spot or a glitch, but nothing fixed it. I started feeling anxious about going upstairs. I still did it because it was part of my job, but I dreaded those rounds. My heart would beat faster the moment I reached the fourth floor. The smell of dampness clung to me, and the hallway lights never flickered in a reassuring way. They always seemed to buzz or dim at the worst times. Sometimes I would stand in front of the corridor for a few seconds, just bracing myself before I walked in. I had this constant feeling that someone was watching me from around the corner or maybe from behind one of the office doors, but every time I opened a door, it was an empty room. Dusty desks or old chairs, nothing else. The building manager came by one morning as I was getting ready to leave. He asked me how the nights were. I told him everything was fine, which was a lie. I didn't want to sound like I was losing it. He nodded and said, yeah, a few guys in the past mentioned hearing things upstairs, but we never found anything. It's probably just the pipes or the old ventilation system. I nodded. I didn't push it, but part of me wanted to demand that they put more cameras or do a thorough inspection. I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining it. Yet I stayed quiet. I needed the job about 2 weeks into working there. I had the worst night yet. It started normally. I locked the front doors at 9 o'clock, checked the cameras, and made my first round at 11 o'clock. Nothing unusual around 2 in the morning. I saw a flicker on the top floor feed again, but this time the flicker lasted a couple of seconds. The camera glitched, showing static, then it cleared. I saw something at the very end of the hallway near the last door on the right. It looked like a figure. It was just a shape, a dark outline. My stomach turned. I left the security room, my flashlight in hand, and took the stairs. My heart pounded the entire way up. I was breathing hard by the time I reached the top. The corridor was dim. The overhead lights flickered more than usual. I walked slowly toward that last door. My footsteps echoed, and I heard that heavy tread again, like someone was walking 2 steps behind me. But when I spun around, there was no one. My hand shook. I felt sweat on my forehead. I said in a low voice, "Is anyone here?" Silence. The only sound was the hum of the old lights. I pointed my flashlight at the end of the corridor, then at the walls. No movement. I made it to the last door and put my hand on the knob, locked. I tried looking under the door, pitch black on the other side. I stood there for a moment just listening. It felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Then I heard a footstep behind me. It was so close I actually jerked forward. I turned around and my flashlight illuminated empty space. Nobody was there. I felt a chill crawl up my back, and I sprinted for the stairs. Once I made it back to the security room, I felt my legs shaking. I sat down and tried to calm myself. I stared at the camera feed. The top floor looked perfectly still. No flickers, no figures, no movement. Everything was normal again. My mind raced with questions. I wondered if I was losing it, but I kept thinking about how real those footsteps sounded. They were heavy like boots on a hollow floor. I decided to stay in the security room for the rest of the night. I didn't want to go back upstairs unless I absolutely had to. My routine shifted after that. I still did the mandatory rounds, but I rushed them. I would climb the stairs, check the floors quickly, and then come right back down. I started hating the feeling of the stale air up there. It felt like it was pushing against me. Even the walls looked different. The paint was peeling in spots I hadn't noticed before. The hallway light seemed dimmer each time I went up. I wondered if it was just my fear magnifying everything. I also noticed that my anxiety carried over into the rest of my life. I lost sleep during the day, worried about going back in at night. My stomach felt knotted all the time, but I kept showing up because I needed the money. One night I decided to try something different. I brought a small voice recorder from home, thinking maybe I could capture the sound of those footsteps. I placed it in the top floor corridor around midnight. I hid it in a corner so it wouldn't be in plain sight. I pressed record and went back down to the security room around 2 in the morning. I saw another brief flicker on the camera feed. I made a note of the time. At the end of my shift around 5, I picked up the recorder and took it home. I played it back that morning for the first hour. There was nothing but silence and the faint hum of the lighting. Then around the 2-hour mark, I heard a clear sound, heavy footsteps. They started and stopped a few times like someone was pacing. Then it went quiet again, but I heard no voices, no doors, nothing else. It gave me chills. At least now I had some proof that something was happening in that corridor. But it also scared me even more. I thought about showing the manager, but I decided against it. I didn't want him to think I was trying to stir up trouble or that I was some paranoid guy with a tape recorder. So I kept it to myself the next few nights. The activity stayed consistent, heavy footsteps. Flickers on the camera, that strong sense of being watched. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of a shape at the end of the hallway, but it never stayed long enough for me to see details. It felt like a slow torture. My heart raced every time I opened the stairwell door to head up there. 2 weeks ago, I had an experience that still makes my skin crawl. I was in the security room watching the feeds around 1 in the morning. The top floor camera started to flicker again, but this time it didn't just glitch out. It went dark for several seconds. I tried switching the camera view, but it stayed dark. Then it came back online, and I saw the corridor standing at the far end. Near the last door, there was a person-shaped outline. It was too dark to see any features. It wasn't moving. It just stood there facing the camera. My heart slammed in my chest. I got up ready to go upstairs, but then the figure disappeared, and the camera feed returned to normal. I grabbed my flashlight and ran for the stairs. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my key ring. When I reached the 5th floor, the corridor was empty. The lights buzzed overhead. The door at the end of the hall was locked. Like always, I checked every corner, every small closet, and each office. Nothing. The air smelled stale and damp. The same as every other night, I felt queasy. I left as fast as I could. After that, I started talking to the daytime cleaning staff. They don't come in at night, but they know the building well. One of them, a guy in his 50s, told me he never goes up to the 5th floor unless he has to. He said he always felt uneasy there, like it was heavier, though. He didn't use fancy words. He just said it gave him the creeps. He never mentioned seeing anyone, but he did say he sometimes heard odd sounds when he was working late. That made me feel a bit better because it meant I wasn't the only one, but it also confirmed that this wasn't just in my head. I'm still here doing the same job, listening to the same empty corridors at night. Every shift I think about quitting my stomach. CHS, whenever I walk up those stairs, the footsteps haven't stopped, and I still catch that shape from time to time on the camera. It never shows up in the recording, so I have no video proof, just that audio of the footsteps when I watch the live feed. Sometimes I see something at the edges. It's subtle, like the corner of the screen goes dark for a second, but there's nothing. When I rewind, I can't explain it. I don't know what's going on, and I'm not sure I want to find out. I just know that I feel watched up there. The smell never goes away, and the lights never fully stop flickering each time I unlock the front door and walk inside. At the start of my shift, I feel that grip of anxiety. I push through it because I need the paycheck, but part of me is always bracing for something worse. So far, nothing else has happened. No one has been hurt, and I haven't seen any evidence of an intruder. I just know that every time I set foot on that top floor, I feel a presence, and those footsteps keep coming like a reminder that I'm not really alone. I don't tell people the full story because most would laugh or say I'm tired. But it's real to me. I hear the heavy steps. I see flickers on the camera. I smell the damp air. I feel that grip of fear in my chest. It's enough to make me jump at every small noise. I've learned to live with it night after night, and that's all there is to it. I'm still here doing the job, waiting for morning, always wondering what else might happen in those dark corridors. I woke up on my first night in that new apartment with sweat dripping down my neck and my heart pounding against my chest. My bedroom door was slightly AAR, even though I remembered shutting it. Before I went to bed, the hallway light was off, but I could see a faint glow coming from somewhere near the bathroom. I got up, walked over, and noticed the bathroom door was wide open. I had closed it too. I stood there for a few seconds trying to make sense of it. I checked the apartment's main door to see if it was still locked. No windows were open, everything was still and quiet, but I felt my skin crawl. I'm a 36-year-old guy recently divorced and trying to start over in a small ground floor apartment in a quiet residential neighborhood. The place seemed fine at first. It's an older building with thick walls and narrow hallways. The landlord told me the previous tenant moved out to live closer to work. I didn't think much of it. I liked that it was affordable and had enough space for me. But after those first few nights, I realized something about the doors wasn't right. Every time I'd go to bed, I'd make sure all the interior doors were closed. Sometimes I'd even lock the bathroom door just to see if it would stay that way. More than once, I got up in the middle of the night and discovered that it was not only unlocked, but also standing open. I started to think it might be the wind. I checked the windows, I checked the frames. I noticed there was no draft. The seals were intact, the doors didn't move. When I tried forcing air through the rooms, yet at night, they kept shifting on their hinges. In the mornings, I'd wake up and see the doors open, and sometimes I'd find little items I had placed to block them were pushed aside one time. I set a small cardboard box in front of the bathroom door before going to bed. The next morning, the box had been slid about a foot to the side. There was no damage to the box, and it looked like something or someone had deliberately placed it out of the way. Another time, I put a paperback book against the hinge side of the door when I got up. The book was on the sink in the bathroom. I had no explanation for that. My front door was still locked, and there was no sign of forced entry. It rattled me. I decided to start writing down the times. I heard noises. I bought a small notebook and kept it on my bedside table at night. If I heard a strange sound, I'd jot down the time as best I could. Most of the noises happened between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. They weren't loud crashes or bangs, they were subtle. Sometimes it was a small creak, other times a low scrape like a door brushing against the floor occasionally. I'd hear a faint click like a latch moving. I'd sit up, turn on my lamp, and feel my pulse racing. My throat would get tight, and I'd have this urge to check every corner of the place each time I found nothing. Except the same odd detail, one or more doors were open when they shouldn't have been. I started losing sleep. My job performance took a hit because I'd show up exhausted. I'd drink coffee until my stomach burned. I tried telling a coworker about it, but as soon as I mentioned doors opening by themselves, she gave me that polite nod people give when they think you're exaggerating or losing your mind, she suggested. Maybe the building was settling old structures. Do weird things, she said. Maybe the frames are shifting. I considered that, but the speed and consistency with which these doors opened made no sense, and nothing else was out of place in the apartment. A week later, I decided to try some basic security measures. I put small pieces of tape on the doors to see if they moved when I wasn't watching. I placed strips of tape at the top edge so if the door opened, the tape would tear. Sure enough, every single piece of tape was either peeled off or torn the next morning. I never found the tape on the door or on the floor. It just disappeared. I felt a mix of anger and fear. Someone was tampering with my stuff. Someone was inside my apartment while I slept, moving around, messing with my doors to calm myself. I checked the windows and the main door again. The lock seemed fine. The front door had a deadbolt and a chain lock. I tested them, everything functioned. Normally, I even tried pushing and pulling on the windows to see if maybe they were looser than they looked. They weren't. They stuck in place when I left the apartment. I double-checked the locks when I came back. Nothing looked disturbed, but at night things changed. My sleep got worse. I started waking up in a cold sweat around 2 or 3. Hard in the morning, heart hammering my mouth dry. I'd lie there straining my ears. Sometimes I'd hear a soft creak from the other side of the apartment. My stomach would clench and I'd feel like my chest was tight. I'd go check the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom. Every time I'd find at least one door open that I knew I'd closed. The bathroom light would be on or the closet door in the hallway would be halfway open. My eyes would dart around expecting to see someone standing there, but I'd find nothing, just empty space. I started locking all the interior doors before bed. I even purchased little wedge door, stops the kind you push under the door to keep it in place. They didn't help. I'd wake up, find the wedge moved a few inches away and the door opened. No prints, no scuff marks, nothing. My arms would shake when I tried to put the wedge back in. The morning I felt powerless one night around 2:15 a.m., and I heard what sounded like slow footsteps near the hallway. My bedroom door was closed. I reached over to my nightstand and grabbed my cell phone. I sat there in bed listening. The footsteps were faint but steady. My pulse was so loud in my ears that I almost couldn't hear anything else. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't want to deal with the hassle unless I was certain someone was inside. Finally, I stood up and tiptoed to the door. I could hardly breathe. My legs felt weak. I opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark. I reached for the light switch on the wall. The bulb flickered to life. Nothing moved. The apartment was dead silent. I walked to the bathroom, checked behind the shower curtain. Empty. I checked the front door. Still lock chain secured, deadbolt in place. I felt the handle. Nothing jiggled. I stood there in the darkness, my throat tight, telling myself to calm down, but my nerves were shot. I could still feel that strange tension in the air, like I wasn't alone. Eventually, I crawled back into bed and stared at the ceiling until my alarm went off at 6:30. I got up for work, feeling like I'd barely slept the next weekend. I decided to stay up late and see if I could catch anything in the ACT. I made coffee around 1 p.m., set up a chair in the living room facing the hallway, and turned off all the lights except a dim lamp in the corner. I sat there, phone in hand, trying not to doze off around 1 a.m. I was still awake, eyes heavy, arms jittery from caffeine. Everything was quiet, no clicks, no creaks, no movement. I got up, walked around to stay awake. I went to the bathroom, locked the door from the inside, then closed it. I wedged a doorstop under it too, then I went back to my chair and watched at 2:40 a.m. I felt my eyes droop and my head nodded forward. I fought the sleep for a moment, then out of nowhere I heard a soft scraping sound. My eyes flew open and I sat up straight. I stared at the bathroom door down the hall. It looked the same, but the sound came again, a scraping noise that lasted maybe 2 seconds. I swallowed hard and turned on my phone's camera, pointing it toward the hallway. I stood up and took a few careful steps forward, trying not to make any noise. The bathroom door was still shut, but I noticed the doorstop wasn't where I had placed it. It was lying on its side about a foot away from the frame. I moved closer and reached out to the knob. It was locked, just like I had left it. My heart was pounding so hard it made my chest ache. I thought maybe someone was inside. I put my ear to the door and listened. I couldn't hear anything after a few seconds. I slid the lock open and turned the knob. The door opened with a small click. I stuck my phone in first, filming the small cramped space. The light was off. I flicked it on. It was empty. Nothing in the shower, nothing on the floor. I checked the tiny window in the bathroom, locked from the inside. My breathing was shallow. My hands were sweaty and my palms tingled. I felt drained when I stepped out. I almost tripped over the wedge that had been tossed aside. I picked it up and examined it. There were no scratches or any sign that someone had forced it. It looked like it had just been placed there that night. I barely slept the next day. I went to a home improvement store and bought a cheap motion-activated camera. I set it up in the hallway, aimed at the bathroom door and the bedroom door. I tested it a few times, walking back and forth to see if the sensor triggered it. Worked fine. I left it running overnight. When I woke up the following morning, the camera was off. I checked the batteries, they were still good. The power switch had been turned to the off position. I replayed the footage. I had it ended at 2:13 a.m. I watched the last recorded clip. It showed me walking down the hallway at around 1:58. Then the camera caught about 15 minutes of stillness. The final frame showed the bathroom door still closed, and then the recording just stopped. The next clips were blank. I stared at that last frame for a while. There was no shape, no figure. Nothing that explained why the switch had changed positions. I stopped feeling safe in my own place. I'd lie in bed anticipating the sound of hinges or the click of a latch. I'd tense up my stomach, twisting into knots. My jaw would clench. If I heard even the slightest noise, my heart would skip. One night, I dreamt that I saw someone standing in the doorway, but when I woke up, the door was shut. The confusion and stress were wearing me down. Work became a fog. My boss asked if I was okay. I said I wasn't sleeping well. He didn't push for details, and I was relieved. Another time, I tried leaving all the doors open in the evening just to see if it changed anything. I ate dinner, watched some TV, and then dozed off on the couch around 3 a.m. I woke up with a STI stiff neck. The lights were off, and I didn't remember turning them off. The bathroom door was closed, the bedroom door was closed, the closet door in the hallway was halfway shut. I got to my feet and turned the living room lights back on. My heart was thumping again, and I was breathing fast. I checked my phone to see if maybe the power went out, but the phone was charging normally. No sign of a power outage. I realized I was shaking a little. I started wondering if I was sleepwalking. I tried setting up the camera again, double-checking that the switch was fully in the on position and making sure the batteries were fresh. I let it run while I tried to. Sleep the next morning, the camera was still on, but the memory card was missing. I looked everywhere on the floor under furniture in the hallway, but it was gone. I felt an emptiness in my stomach that made me want to throw up. Somebody had taken it, or something was messing with me in ways I couldn't explain. I hated being there. I dreaded nighttime. I dreaded the creak of a door. A few days later, I decided I had to leave. I gave my landlord notice that I would move out at the end of the month. I didn't want to argue about the deposit. I just needed to get away from that place. I spent the last night sleeping with the lights on, feeling anxious and half awake. The doors still opened on their own, and I still heard soft creaks in the middle of the night. My attempts to block them never worked the next day. They were always open, and any items I used as barriers were moved. I never caught anyone in the act, and the locks never showed any sign of tampering. I can't explain it, but that's the story. No broken doors, no forced entries, just a lot of missing tape, a moved wedge, and a sense of being watched by the time I started packing. I felt a cold knot in my stomach every time I came home. I kept hearing those soft scraping sounds and felt my pulse jump. Sometimes I'd sweat so much that I'd change shirts in the middle of the night. I just wanted out. I left that apartment 3 weeks ago. I'm staying at a friend's place now, and I'm sleeping normally again. I haven't experienced anything strange since I moved. I don't know if there's a logical explanation. I just know I couldn't stay there any longer. Those doors kept opening night after night, no matter what I did, and I never figured out who or what was causing it. All I know is that whenever I think about those nights, I can still feel that chill on my arms and remember the sound of those hinges squeaking in the dark. I don't scare easily, but there's one night I can't forget. I remember every detail like it just happened, and it still makes my stomach tighten whenever I think about it. I was on my usual late shift driving around a busy city that never really sleeps. At least that's what I used to believe that night, though. The streets felt emptier than usual. I had already taken a few rides, nothing special, just the typical airport drop-offs and a few groups leaving bars around 2 a.m., and I got a ride request from a spot on a long avenue with barely any lights. It was an odd place to wait, but I never questioned requests. I just drove to the P.N. When I got close to the pickup location, I saw a figure standing near a faded street lamp. The lamp flickered, and I couldn't make out his face. At first, he was alone. He didn't move much. He just stood there facing the street as I rolled up. I noticed he was dressed in dark clothes, black jacket, black pants, no bright colors, no reflective stripes. He didn't flag me down or wave. He just stood with his head slightly angled toward the car. I pulled over, unlocked the doors, and said, "Hey, you the one who requested a ride?" He nodded. He didn't say a word. He opened the back door and slid in behind the passenger seat. He shut the door softly, not slamming it, not making any sudden moves. I usually greet new passengers, say something like, "How's your night?" or "Where are you headed?" But something about his silence made me hesitate. I caught his eyes in the rearview mirror. They were narrow, and he looked like he hadn't slept. There was a kind of intensity there that I didn't want to provoke. "Still, I tried a small greeting evening," I said. He nodded again, still not speaking. I glanced at the app. It showed a destination across the city near an older neighborhood. It would take at least 30 minutes, maybe more with the late-night road closures. I thought about turning on some music to cut the tension, but part of me wanted to hear everything in case he started talking. I felt uneasy, my mouth felt dry. I kept my right hand on the steering wheel and my left near my phone. I always mount it on the dashboard so I can follow the GPS that night. I was extra aware of where my phone was. He sat there staring straight ahead. A few minutes went by, and the only sounds I heard were the tires on the asphalt and the low hum of the engine. Then out of nowhere, he started muttering. I couldn't make out the words. They sounded disjointed, like he was talking to himself in a code or a language I didn't recognize. It was low at first. A whisper. I turned my head slightly and said, "Sorry, were you saying something?" He stopped. He looked at me through the rearview mirror. Our eyes met. I felt a jolt in my chest. He didn't answer. I kept driving. My skin felt prickly, like every hair on my arms was standing up. My heart pounded a little faster. I turned back to the road, focusing on the next intersection, the next traffic light. He went back to his low muttering soft enough that I couldn't make out any real sentences. I tried to ignore it, but every few seconds his eyes would lock onto the mirror. He wasn't just glancing, he was staring directly into my reflection. I felt the muscles in my neck tighten. I reminded myself to stay calm. Keep going, don't escalate anything. About 10 minutes into the ride, something weird happened with my phone. The GPS voice got garbled, then it cut out completely. The screen froze and the route disappeared. I tried to tap the screen, but it was unresponsive. That's weird, I said out loud, partly to him, partly to myself. I tried to check my signal, but it showed no bars. That never happened on that avenue. I sighed, trying to keep my cool. I'm going to try to reconnect. I said more for my own comfort than his. He didn't respond. I glanced at the radio next, thinking I'd check the traffic updates or weather. The display was blank. No static, no music. It was just off, like someone pulled the plug. I pressed the power button, turned the knob. Nothing. I'm not superstitious. But a part of my mind started to race with thoughts about something unnatural going on. I pushed that aside. It's just a glitch. I told myself things break all the time, but my skin felt cold and my breath got shallow. I tried to focus on the road with the GPS dead. I had to rely on memory. I knew a basic route to the destination, but it was a tricky area full of one-way streets. Still, I kept going, hoping the phone would fix itself. The passenger stayed quiet except for occasional whispers. ISW followed hard. My throat felt tight. Then maybe 15 minutes later, the passenger spoke clearly for the first time. "Turn here," he said. It wasn't a request. It sounded like an order. His voice was raspy, like he had a sore throat. There was a side street on my right, and I hesitated because it wasn't on my usual route, but I figured maybe he knew a shortcut, or maybe that was where he wanted to go. I turned the wheel. The street starry was dimly lit, and the lamps seemed fewer and farther apart. Some of them were out, leaving patches of darkness. I drove slowly, trying to see where we were going. Houses with closed shutters and tall fences blurred past. He pointed ahead. "Keep going," he said, still in that low-strained voice. We passed intersections where I could have turned onto brighter roads, but he stayed silent until we reached a stretch of empty lots and run-down buildings. The area felt abandoned at that point. I was fully on edge. My fingertips tingled, and I kept my eyes darting between the passenger and the road. The heavy quiet around us pressed in on me. No cars, no pedestrians, no lights and windows. He leaned forward a bit, bringing his face closer to my seat. I heard him breathe. "Stop here," he said. His tone wasn't aggressive, but it was firm. It wasn't near any recognizable address. There was just a row of old street lamps. Half of them off the pavement was cracked. I almost said something like, "Are you sure?" But my words stuck. I slowed down and pulled to the curb. The street felt dead. There was no wind, no rustling of trees, nothing. I put the car in park. I watched him in the mirror, and his face had this faint grin. It didn't look friendly, it looked strange. The corners of his mouth curved up slightly, and his eyes seemed almost blank. I felt a chill run down my spine. My heart thudded in my chest. My hands felt clammy on the wheel. I wanted him out of the car, but I also felt scared of what he might do if I rushed him. I unbuckled my seatbelt just in case I needed to move fast. He exhaled sharply like a short laugh without any real amusement. Then he reached for the door, he pushed it open and slid out in one quick motion before I could say a word. He was halfway across the street. The way he moved didn't seem normal. He didn't run, but he slipped into the darkness between the broken street lamps. Almost immediately, one moment. He was there, the next he was gone. I stuck my head out the window trying to see where he went. I couldn't hear his footsteps or see his silhouette. My heart pounded. I realized I was practically holding my breath. I looked at the empty street, the dark buildings, the flicker lamp to my left. The only sound was my own breathing and the low hum of my engine. I pulled my head back in, locked the doors, and tried my phone again. Suddenly, I had full bars. The GPS map loaded right away. Notifications popped up one after another like nothing had been wrong. Even my radio turned back on by itself. Blaring the last station I had tuned to, I jumped at the sudden noise, then fumbled to shut it off. I felt a wave of relief, but also confusion. 1 second, everything was dead. The next second, it was all fine. I shook my head, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the curb. My stomach felt queasy. I glanced back at the dark street, but I didn't see anything except a stretch of road disappearing under broken lights. My phone buzzed, alerting me to new ride requests, but I ignored them for a moment. I just wanted to get somewhere bright and safe. I found the main road again, and as soon as I hit the busier avenue, the world felt normal. Cars drove by, streetlights worked. The phone never lost signal. I took a deep breath, parked at a gas station, and got out to stretch my legs. My knees felt weak and my hands trembled. I checked the back seat. The passenger hadn't left anything behind. The seat wasn't even warm, like he'd never been there. I shook my head in disbelief. What the hell was that? I whispered to myself. A part of me wondered if I should call the cops, but I didn't have a crime to report. He didn't threaten me, didn't do anything illegal. As far as I knew, I decided to let it go standing by the gas pump. I felt the cool night air on my face. It helped me calm down a bit. I took a few more deep breaths, trying to shake off the tense feeling in my chest. My phone stayed connected, which made me feel a little better. I stared at it, half expecting it to glitch again, but it seemed stable. I got back in the car and looked at the clock. The entire trip had taken about 25 minutes. Though it felt a lot longer, my shift wasn't over, but I considered calling it a night. I had a sick feeling in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I started driving toward my usual spots where bars stay open late. Maybe I could pick up a normal fare. Something to push this weird experience out of my mind, but as I cruised, every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, I half expected to see that man's eyes staring back. I picked up 2 more passengers that night, both pretty regular, a guy headed home from work and a woman needing a ride to a nightclub. Nothing strange happened with them. My phone and radio worked fine by the time my shift ended. The sun was starting to rise and I felt exhausted. I went home, parked in my usual spot, and just sat in my car for a minute. I replayed everything in my head: his side, Ents, the muttering, the dead signals, his sudden departure, how the phone came back online right after it made no sense. I asked myself if I had missed something. Maybe the passenger was having a medical episode, or was under the influence, but that wouldn't explain the electronics dying the way they did. Then coming back, I didn't see him carry any device that could jam signals. It didn't look like he was messing with anything on his phone. He never used his phone in the car at all, and he left so fast I didn't have any friends who would believe me without a bit of joking around. So I never told the full story. I just said I had a weird ride that night, but every time I recall it, I feel that pressure in my chest, that cold sweat. The memory of him smiling in that unsettling way. It wasn't a big grin, it was just a small curve of the lips, but it felt threatening in a way. I can't fully explain. I've been driving for years, and I've seen rude passengers, angry ones. Even a few who were obviously intoxicated, none of them freaked me out like that. After a few nights, I returned to the same area to see if there was something off about the place. I drove by the street during the day. It looked like any neglected neighborhood with a few vacant lots and old buildings. The street lamps were there, some broken, some missing. I couldn't find anything unusual. No big electrical towers or weird transmissions that might explain my phone's behavior. I parked for a minute and stared at the spot where I pulled over. That night, it looked completely ordinary in daylight. I felt a chill. Though I remembered that empty feeling, the silence, the flickering light, I started feeling uneasy again, so I left. I continued driving nights, but I never got another request from that spot. I watched my phone a bit closer, making sure the GPS was stable. Everything worked normally, the memory never left though. Every time I pick up someone who sits quietly or stares too long, my pulse quickens. I remember that passenger's face in my mirror. I remember the tension in my gut when the roads are empty and the radio is low. I almost expect it all to happen again. I have a routine now. I keep my car in good condition, check the electrical systems, make sure my phone has the latest updates. I also watch my passengers more carefully. If someone gets in and acts too strange, I might ask them a few questions right away. I try to keep my distance. If they make me uneasy, still nothing has been as unsettling as that one ride. I'll never know what caused the signal to vanish or why everything returned to normal. The second he left, I sometimes think about the possibility of him waiting out there looking for another ride. Maybe he does that to drivers messing with their heads. I don't know. All I know is that I felt real fear that night, the kind that makes your heart pee and your skin crawl. I didn't see any weapons, no direct threat, but it was enough to leave me shaky and confused. Some nights I push the memory aside and do my job without any issues. Other nights, like tonight, I can't help but remember when I see a lone figure standing in a dark spot, my thoughts jump back to him. I wonder if I should accept the request or just drive on. Usually I accept, but part of me is always ready for something strange to happen again. The city can be unpredictable late at night, and I've seen more than my share of odd characters, but that passenger was different. I still can't explain why, and I guess I never will. So that's what happened. No children were involved. No one died, but it shook me. I still drive, but I keep my senses on high alert. Late nights on the road can get eerie, and I've learned to trust my gut. I can't forget the way he stared at me in the mirror or the way the radio and phone died. Then came back the second he stepped out. It felt like I was stuck in a bad dream until he vanished into the shadows. And once he did, it was like none of it had ever happened. That's the story. I can't get out of my head even telling it. Now I feel a little on edge, like someone's behind me watching, but there's no one here. It's just me recalling that weird night. I have no explanation for it. I have no evidence. All I know is how it felt, I guess. That's all I can really say. It happened, and it hasn't happened since, but sometimes on a lonely street at 2 a.m, I wonder if it could happen again, and if it does, I'm not sure what I'll do. I'll probably just keep driving and hope I make it through the night. I didn't think anything could shake me out there. I've camped in that mountainous region more times than I can count, and it's always felt like my territory. Then I went on a Tuesday expecting my usual peace, and by Thursday night I realized I'd misjudged everything. I got to the trailhead around noon on Tuesday. The parking lot was empty, there were no other cars, and not even a single person hanging around. I felt a little thrilled at the idea of having the place to myself. I like that solitude. It's a break from the constant noise of my job in the city. I loaded up my pack with a tent, my cooking gear, some food, and a few changes of clothes. The air felt crisp and the sky was clear. I started the hike. The path was a little rough in places, but I'd been there enough times to know every stretch. I noticed how quiet it was. I couldn't hear voices or music or anything that usually comes with other campers. Just my footsteps and the distant sounds of birds. My breathing became steady as I moved uphill, and I felt that usual rush of calm I get when I leave civilization behind. My plan was to reach a clearing about 3 miles in, where there's a small plateau with flat ground for the tent. I got there by mid-afternoon. The place looked just like I remembered: some tall pines, a view of a nearby ridge, and a small circle of stones where people sometimes build their campfires. I set down my pack, stretched my shoulders, and started pitching my tent. No complicated steps. I spread out the ground, sheets, slid the poles into place, and staked everything down. I pulled out a small folding chair from my pack, Set it next to where I planned to make a fire and just sat there for a few minutes, letting my muscles relax. When evening came, I made a simple dinner. I had a small propane stove, so I heated water for some dehydrated meal. It tasted bland, but it filled me up. The night air got cold fast, so I lit a campfire in that ring of stones. I didn't have much wood, only a few broken branches I'd gathered, but it was enough for a small fire. I stared at the flames, feeling the temperature drop, and eventually decided to turn in early. That first night went by without any problems. I slept solid, didn't wake up once the second day was Wednesday, and I wanted to check out a nearby stream. I followed a narrow path through the trees, heading downhill until I heard the running water. When I got there, I filled my water bottle and washed my face. It felt icy, which woke me up more than I expected. I stood there for a while, scanning the area. No sign of any other humans, not a single footprint in the mud. I saw a few deer tracks, maybe some raccoon prints, but no boot prints. It confirmed what I already knew. I was completely alone out there. I went back to camp, ate a little snack of jerky and dried fruit, then decided to gather more firewood for the coming night. I walked around picking up branches, breaking them into smaller pieces, making sure they were dry enough the sun was still high so I wasn't rushed. I probably spent an hour walking around with an armful of wood. Then I piled it near the fire ring. Everything felt normal. I never got any strange vibe during the day. Not even when the wind picked up that second evening. I cooked a bigger meal. I had some instant noodles and tossed in a few bits of dehydrated vegetables. Nothing gourmet, but warm and filling. I watched the sun sink behind the ridge, turning the sky orange. I leaned back, listened to the wind in the trees, and felt grateful for the quiet. I remember that moment well because it was the last time I felt relaxed on that trip. I let the fire burn down to embers and crawled into my tent around 10. My sleeping bag was warm. The night air was cold enough to sting my face. If it got exposed, I drifted off, not expecting anything to bother me. Sometime after midnight, maybe around 2 in the morning, I woke up, my eyes shot open because I heard something outside. It was a rustling sound like leaves being disturbed. At first, I told myself it was probably an animal. It's normal to have critters sniffing around a campsite. I stayed quiet, just listening. Then I picked up this other sound, something that reminded me of breathing. It wasn't loud. It was more like a faint huffing or panting. It had a rhythm to it, like it was alive. I started feeling my heart pounding. My mouth went dry. I realized I was gripping the edge of my sleeping bag. I didn't want to move too fast or make noise. I reached for my flashlight, which was right next to my pillow. I flicked it on, but I didn't unzip my tent yet. I just aimed the light at the tent wall. There was no shape visible from inside, no shadow or silhouette. I couldn't tell if something was just behind the tent or farther away. My mind was racing. I thought about what animals could be out there. Deer, they usually move quietly, and I don't think I'd hear them panting like that bear. It's possible, but I couldn't hear any heave steps or any typical bear sounds. I've encountered bears before, and they tend to grunt or sniff. In a more distinct way, this sounded different, almost like someone breathing with their mouth open. After a few minutes, everything went silent again. I felt a slight breeze, but the breathing noise stopped. My muscles were tense. I wanted to check outside, but I felt a spike of fear. Eventually, I mustered the courage to unzip the tent a few inches. I stuck my flashlight out and swept the beam around the forest. Looked still, the pine needles and leaves on the ground barely moved. I pushed the zipper all the way, just enough to peek my head out. My breath came out in shallow bursts because I was so on edge. Nothing, absolutely nothing. I shone the light on the ground, hoping to see tracks or some sign of an animal. I didn't see any immediate footprints. I looked toward the fire ring, only faint embers. There was no movement. I listened, holding my breath. Not a single sound. After a minute or two, I zipped up again. I lay back down, but my body was rigid. I tried to tell myself it was probably a small animal that just sounded weird, or maybe the wind was playing tricks, but it didn't feel that way. The breathing had sounded too deliberate. I stayed awake for at least another hour, maybe more. Every time I started to drift off, I heard a soft crunch outside. It might have just been the trees settling or branches shifting, but in that heightened state, it felt like someone or something was circling my campsite. My thoughts were scattered. I considered grabbing my knife, but then I thought, what if it's just a curious raccoon or fox? Eventually, I must have fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, Thursday, I crawled out of the tent feeling groggy. My back hurt a bit from how tense I'd been. I walked over to the fire ring and noticed footprints in the soft dirt. I immediately knelt down to examine them. They weren't clear boot prints like mine, and they weren't paw prints from a typical animal. They looked almost like a cross between a shoe and a bare foot, but bigger. The outline wasn't sharp, but I could see that it wasn't the shape of my boots. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach. I checked around the clearing for more prints. I found a couple near some trees a few yards away. Then they disappeared on the harder ground. I stood there rubbing the back of my neck, trying to figure out what could have left them. It didn't look like some typical hiking boot. The shape was longer and the edges were softer, maybe some kind of wide footwear or something worn down. I didn't recognize it. It unnerved me. It also confirmed that I hadn't imagined the noises during the night I spent the rest of Thursday trying to keep myself occupied. I walked a mile or two down a side trail, but I couldn't stop thinking about those tracks. At one point, I caught myself turning around every few steps looking for movement. The wind picked up again around midday and the temperature stayed chilly. I returned to my camp feeling that tension in my shoulders. I didn't see anything out of place besides those footprints, but that was enough to keep my guard up by late afternoon. I had to decide whether to stay another night or leave. My plan was to stay until Friday morning, and I didn't want to cut my trip short, but I felt uneasy in the end. I decided to stay, but I told myself I'd stay alert. I organized my gear, made sure everything was packed in a way that I could leave quickly if I needed to. I collected enough wood to keep a fire going longer into the night. I ate an early dinner of canned soup, heated on my little stove. I tried to keep calm, but my hands were a bit shaky when darkness fell. I made a bigger fire than the nights before. I sat close to it, occasionally glancing at the tree line. The shadows shifted with the flames. I didn't see anything move out there. The only sounds I heard were the crackle of the fire and the wind. But that memory of the breathing wouldn't leave my head at around 11. I added more wood to the fire, hoping the light would discourage any curious animals or other visitors. My mind kept going back to those strange footprints. I thought about possible explanations. Maybe someone was out here in old boots, or maybe a hunter had some unusual gear, but I hadn't seen a single person for days, and there were no cars parked anywhere near. Maybe someone came in from the other side of the mountain, but that seemed unlikely. Eventually, I got tired enough to crawl into my tent. This time, I kept my flashlight in my hand and my knife was within arm's reach. I left the tent flap partially unzipped so I could see outside. If needed, the glow from the fire illuminated a small patch of ground near my tent. I tried to convince myself that if anything or anyone walked close, I'd see them. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew I was jerking awake, feeling my heart hammer in my chest. It must have been around 2 o'clock in the morning again. The fire had died down to a weak glow and the clearing was mostly dark. My eyes struggled to adjust. I heard that same faint rustle. It sounded like leaves or needles being pushed around, then came the breathing. It was slow and it seemed closer than the night before. I held my breath, straining to listen. My thoughts were scattered and I felt my palms sweating. I realized I was clutching my flashlight with such force my hands started to hurt. My mind spun with different options. Should I shout? Should I jump out of the tent with the knife? Should I just wait quietly? I decided to try shining the flashlight through the partially open flap with my finger on the switch. I clicked it on and aimed the beam outside for a split second. I thought I caught movement at the edge of the light, but by the time the flashlight was pointed there, nothing was visible. The breathing noise stopped. The rustling stopped. I swallowed hard, blinked to clear my eyes, and looked around. The ground looked empty. The tree line was pitch black. I didn't see any shape or outline of a person or animal. My heart wouldn't slow down. I stayed there scanning the darkness, waiting for another sound or movement. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10, and nothing else happened. Eventually, I told myself to lie back down. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every few minutes, I jolt up, shining the flashlight around, seeing nothing but the empty clearing. As soon as the faintest light of dawn appeared, I started packing. I didn't bother with breakfast. I stuffed my sleeping bag into my pack, took down the tent, and made sure I left no trash. My hands were stiff from the cold, and from tension, I looked around the campsite before leaving. The fire was out, the clearing was silent, and I saw no fresh prints that morning, but I felt that unsettling weight in my gut. I hiked out quickly, my mind kept replaying the nights. I scanned the trees on either side of the trail, half expecting to see something or someone watching me. I never spotted anything out of the ordinary, though every sound I heard put me on edge by the time I got back to the car. My body was sore from lack of proper sleep. Once I reached the car, I dumped my pack in the trunk and slammed it shut. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I couldn't decide if I felt relief or lingering fear. I started the engine and pulled out of that empty parking lot, trying to calm my breathing. I didn't talk to anyone about it for a while. I just knew I wasn't in the right headspace to share the details. All I could do was replay the sound of those breaths and picture those strange footprints by my fire ring. I've gone camping since then, but I haven't gone back to that particular spot. Part of me wants to know what I heard, what left those prints. Another part of me wants to forget it altogether that night. Taught me that sometimes even in the places you think you know best, you can discover something you're not prepared to face. I never imagined that volunteering for a night shift at a small museum could make me lose sleep. It was supposed to be a straightforward job. Walk around a few galleries, turn off some lights, lock up and leave. But something in that museum changed my routine. Now I feel my pulse get faster. Just thinking about it. My name is Daniel. I'm 36 years old. I've been helping at this local historical museum for a few months. I started doing it because I needed extra experience in museum curation and security. The museum doesn't have a big staff, and they don't stay late once the last official employee clocks out. I walk through the exhibits with a checklist, make sure nothing is out of place, and turn off the lights. It's a small building, 3 main rooms and a few side corridors with old portraits, documents, and artifacts. Most nights it's quiet. I can hear my own footsteps on the tile floor. I can hear the buzzing of the overhead lamps. I lock the doors, switch everything off, and leave. There is one piece in the museum that makes me nervous. It's a mannequin. Inside a display case in the back gallery, it's dressed in a 19th century outfit, something like a formal suit with a frilled shirt and a dark waistcoat. The mannequin is hum-sized with a blank face. There's a glass pane in front of it. The first time I saw it, I thought it was just another historical costume piece. I didn't expect anything unusual, but after a few weeks, I started noticing small things about its posture. One night, its left arm looked a bit raised compared to how it was the night before. Another night, it was angled at the elbow like it was bent inward. I wasn't sure if I was imagining these changes. I told myself I probably wasn't paying attention to the mannequin's exact pose. I thought maybe the staff had rearranged its arms. Then one night something caught me off guard. I had just walked by the display and noted everything in my log. I knew exactly how the mannequin stood at that moment, arms straight down. Face forward, the rest of the room was still. I left to check another room for a couple of minutes. When I came back, the mannequin was pressed against the glass. Its hand was almost touching the glass panel. Its face was tilted forward, but there was no actual face. Just the blank shape. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. I felt my stomach clench. I turned around quickly, expecting to see someone else in the room, but I was alone. I thought maybe one of the day staff was playing a joke on me. I looked around for any sign that someone had tampered with the case. The lock on the glass door was closed. No footprints, no open side doors. The next morning, I asked the staff about it. I spoke to the curator and one of the assistants. They looked at me like I was asking something ridiculous. They said no one had touched the mannequin. They insisted the glass enclosure had been locked all week, and they had no reason to open it. They thought maybe I was tired or mixing up details in my head. I told them exactly what I saw, but they shrugged it off from that point on. I felt uneasy whenever I walked in that back room. I wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't help watching the mannequin. Each time I passed by, I tried to be rational. Maybe the arms shift slightly because of some mechanical joint. Maybe there's a hinge or bracket that's loose, but that didn't explain how it ended up leaning against the glass. I checked the mount at the base of the mannequin. It seemed bolted down. I wiggled it a bit and it barely moved. It was stable. I tried to push the arms gently once they wouldn't budge without actual effort. So I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. I just didn't have enough information yet. One night I walked into the museum around 700 in the evening. The place had closed an hour earlier, so I used my key to get in through the side entrance. The curator and the other staff had left. I locked the door behind me and started my routine. I walked through the main gallery, looking at the old paintings and checking the lights. I wrote down a few notes in my log about a flickering bulb near the portrait section. Then I went to the second room where they keep old photographs and letters. I made sure everything looked secure. I moved on to the back room where the mannequin was displayed. The lights in that room are always dim. They use low wattage bulbs to preserve some fragile fabrics in the other displays. My footsteps echoed. I felt an odd pressure in my chest, like a slight panic creeping up. I reached the mannequin's case. It stood the same way as the previous night arms. At its sides, the old-fashioned waistcoat buttoned the ruffled collar around its neck. I shined my flashlight on the glass. No fingerprints, no sign of tampering. Everything looked normal, yet I couldn't shake this feeling that it was looking back at me. The mannequin's face is featureless, just a pale shape, but I felt singled out by it. I let out a breath and forced myself to move on. I walked to another corner of the room and checked a small glass case of coins. The quiet was intense. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner. I could hear my own breathing. Then I heard a soft tapping. I turned quickly. I shined my flashlight around. I aimed it at the mannequin. It hadn't moved, but I swore I heard something tapping the glass. My heart started pounding. I gripped the flashlight with both hands. I stood still and listened. Nothing else happened. I walked closer and stared at the mannequin. Its arms were in the same position. The glass was clear. See, I saw my own reflection in it. I felt a tightness in my throat. I tried to calm down. I checked the vents in case the air was blowing something against the glass, but nothing was near that display. There were no items that could tap the glass. I told myself I might have imagined it. I walked out into the hallway and started heading back toward the main entrance. I carried a ring of keys in my left hand. I held them tight and heard the metal clanking a bit. My legs felt slightly shaky. I decided to do one. More passed through the other exhibits before turning off all the lights. I spent another 20 minutes walking around, noting everything. I felt a strange urge to check on the mannequin again, but I didn't want to linger. I ended up returning to the back room anyway. I felt pulled to that spot just to be sure everything was fine. When I walked back in, my stomach tightened again. The mannequin was still behind the glass, but now its right arm was raised. The hand was level with its waist. That was not how it looked. Before I walked right up to the glass and I actually touched it with my fingertips, I saw no gap, no damage. The lock at the side was still secured. My heart raced. I felt my mouth going dry. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I just forgot the exact position. Maybe the staff changed it earlier. But I had asked them about that already. They said they never touched it. I stood there for a minute, just staring. The silence felt heavier. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. I lifted my flashlight and aimed it directly at the mannequin's face. I wanted to see if it had any detail, but it was just smooth. Then I heard a faint scraping noise. I jumped back. I felt my shoulders tense up. I stepped around the side of the display looking for some cause. I saw nothing that could make that sound, but the scraping came again softer this time. It sounded like something shifting against fabric or glass. I looked at the base of the mannequin. It hadn't moved from its spot as far as I could tell, but I couldn't be sure. I backed away slowly, still watching it. I felt my chest tighten and I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to exhale. I turned and walked out of the room, but I kept looking over my shoulder. My skin felt cold. My forehead was damp with sweat. I flicked off the light in the corridor and hurried toward the exit. I set the alarm, locked the door, and went to my car the whole time. I kept feeling that something was right behind me. I glanced back at the entrance before I got in the car. I saw only the dark outlines of the exhibits inside for the next few days. I tried to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone there at night. I would do my rounds in a rushed manner. Walking quickly through the corridors, I caught myself looking over my shoulder all the time. I started hating that final walk past the mannequins display one evening. About a week later, I decided to set up my phone to record while I did my checks in the other rooms. I placed it on a tripod facing the case. I hit record and left for about 15 minutes. When I came back, the phone was on the floor. It hadn't cracked, but it was turned off. I always keep it charged, so I knew the battery wasn't dead. The tripod was lying on its side. I picked it up and looked at the mannequin. Its arms were both at its sides. The phone video file had only 3 minutes of footage and the rest was black. It cut off abruptly. I didn't tell anyone at the museum about this. I figured they would think I was messing around or trying to scare people. I started taking shorter shifts. I made excuses to leave earlier. I claimed I had early morning obligations, so I couldn't stay too long at night. I just wanted to avoid that final moment near the mannequin, but eventually I had no choice. The curator asked me to lock up after a late local event. That night there was a small lecture and the last group left around 10. I had to check everything because they had moved some objects for a demonstration. By the time I finished putting them back, it was past 11. The building was dark. Only a few emergency lights in the corridors were on. My footsteps sounded louder than usual. I felt sweat under my arms and my hands trembled a bit. I headed toward the back room. The air felt heavy and I noticed a slight smell of old fabric. The mannequin stood behind the glass. I walked up to it and checked the lock. It was intact. I took a step back. Then I heard a metallic click. It sounded like the lock being released. My chest got tight again. I shined my flashlight on the enclosure. The lock looked the same. I reached out and tested the case door. It didn't move. I let out a shaky breath. I finished the rest of my routine, but I couldn't stop thinking about that click. I went back to the front entrance, turned off the main lights, and punched in the alarm code on my way out. I passed by the corridor leading to the mannequin. One last time, I paused for a second, and I felt something like a faint presence behind me. My back tingled, and I GL glanced over my shoulder. Nothing was there. My heart was hammering, and my breath felt shallow. I left as fast as I could for the next few nights. I tried to act normal. I arrived, did my checks, tried to ignore the feeling of being watched. But each time I walked near that mannequin, I thought its arms were slightly different than the time before. Sometimes the right arm was bent. Other times the left arm seemed raised again occasionally. It looked closer to the glass than it had been the previous day. I kept telling myself there had to be a camera down. I listened, but only silence. My shoulders twitched, though I couldn't relax. I decided to loop around back to my car. I took a few more pictures on the way. I wanted to capture the empty windows and the weathered planks. When I got to my car, I rested against the door for a moment. That's when I realized how stiff my neck felt. I stretched it, rolled my shoulders, and peered over them. Nothing moved. I noticed one house across the street had a broken curtain rod. The curtain hung halfway. It looked like someone had ripped it off. But I didn't see any movement there either. After that, I drove to a small inn about 15 minutes away. I'd made a reservation because I knew I might need a base for a couple of days while I captured more shots in the area. The place looked clean enough. It had a simple front desk, a few chairs in the lobby, and a soda machine by the door. The innkeeper handed me a key and pointed upstairs, saying my room was near the end of the hall. I thanked him and climbed the creaky steps, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. My thoughts kept drifting back to that weird crunching sound behind me in the village that night. I couldn't relax. Even in a soft bed, I tossed and turned, stared at the ceiling, then finally drifted off. But I dreamed. I never remember my dreams in vivid detail, but this one stayed with me. I was back in that empty village, walking along the cracked road. I heard footsteps behind me. I sped up the crunching. got louder, I turned around and saw a shadow. It had no face. It didn't have much of a shape either, but it felt like it was watching me. The dream ended when I tried to run but couldn't move. I woke up with my heart racing. My shirt clung to my back. I glanced at the clock barely past 5 in the morning. I wiped sweat off my forehead and tried to calm down. My mouth felt dry, so I gulped some water from the nightstand. I sat up and stared out the window. It was still dark outside. I felt a strong urge to get some fresh air, but the hall was pitch black, and I wasn't in the mood for wandering around by breakfast time. I convinced myself the dream was just a product of that weird atmosphere in the village. I told myself I'd go back, finish taking pictures, and then move on. The innkeeper served me some coffee and eggs. He was polite but didn't say much. He asked if I was enjoying my stay, and I just nodded. I paid for another night, deciding I'd give myself the full day to explore. I arrived back at the village around 8 in the morning. The sky was clear and the sun was already warming the air. I paired in the same spot near the first boarded-up store. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I did a quick scan of the street. Same emptiness as before. I walked straight to the next block where I had seen a few houses that looked interesting. 2 of them had unusual roof shapes. One had a collapsed porch. I planned to take shots of that one for sure. The silence felt heavier in the morning. No birds chirped. I didn't even see any stray cats or anything like that. I moved around snapping pictures, changing lenses to get wide shots of the entire street. I noticed a few curtains that looked newer, which hinted that someone might still live there, but no people showed up. I found a building with a mailbox that had a name on it. The name's letters were scratched off in places, so I only saw GR or something like that. By mid-morning, I reached a small wooden house that I'd overlooked the day before. The paint was peeling and the front steps looked rotted. I wanted a good shot of the wood texture, so I approached carefully. I didn't want to step on the porch because it looked too weak to hold my weight. I squatted on the ground to get a low angle, then I heard a squeak. It sounded like a floorboard under pressure. I froze and looked up at the windows. They were dusty, but I could see shadows inside. Maybe a piece of furniture. I stood up and called out, "Hello." I got no response. My heart thumped in my chest. My mouth went dry again, and I swallowed hard. I took a step back, unsure if I should walk away. Then I heard another squeak. This one was louder, like something moving inside. The door was closed, but I saw a gap in the frame. The wood near the handle was splintered. I tried to peek through the window, but I couldn't see anything clearly. I felt tension in my stomach. My legs felt stiff. I decided to call out again. Louder this time. "Hello, anyone there?" No answer. The house stayed silent. I realized I was gripping my camera too tight. My knuckles felt sore, so I relaxed my hand. My instincts told me to leave, but I also felt drawn to figure out if someone was inside. I edged toward the window to see if I could detect any movement through the dirty glass. I couldn't see much. The interior looked dark, like there were no lights on. Suddenly, a loud clunk echoed from inside. It sounded like something heavy landing on the floor. My chest tightened. I glanced at the door, debating whether to knock, but everything about the situation put me on edge. The boarded-up houses, the strange footsteps I'd heard, the dream I had, and now these noises inside a place that looked abandoned. My instincts screamed at me to step back. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like something was about to happen. Nothing did. No one came out and I didn't hear any voices, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me from behind those dirty windows. I leaned forward to get one last look, then heard another squeak. Sharper this time, like a board protesting. I jumped, my heart rate shot up and my breath caught. I backed away from the porch, almost stumbling off the curb. I forced myself to keep walking down the street. I tried to focus on other houses, but I couldn't stop thinking about that noise. My eyes flicked back to that wooden house every few steps at one point. I thought I saw the curtain in the side window shift. I stared for a few seconds, but it didn't move again. I wondered if it was just my imagination or a trick of the light. I decided I'd had enough. For one day, I circled back to my car, still gripping my camera. I usually take my time. look for good angles, and try to capture every detail, but I felt uneasy. So I hurried. My boots raised small clouds of dust on the gravel. My breathing was shallow. My hands felt shaky, which is unusual for me. I got in the car and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, just breathing and staring at the steering wheel. My skin felt clammy and my pulse pounded in my ears. I started the engine, then noticed something in the rearview mirror. The street behind me was empty, but I thought I caught a glimpse of movement near the corner of a house. It could have been a curtain or maybe a shutter swaying in the breeze. I couldn't be sure. I turned my head to look through the back window, but I saw nothing. I shook my head and drove off on the drive back to the inn. I felt a tight knot in my gut. It was broad daylight, but I felt cornered by that village. It didn't make sense. Nobody confronted me. I hadn't seen any actual person or found any footprints that confirmed someone was stalking me, but the tension was real. My body reacted like I was in danger. Even my shoulder muscles ached. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, trying to calm down. I told myself I'd pack up tomorrow and leave the area behind. Once I reached the inn, I parked and sat in the car for a minute. My eyes felt drawn to the tree line behind the parking lot. I half expected to see a figure watching me from there, but everything was still. I forced out a long breath, then headed to my room. I locked the door behind me and placed my camera gear on the small table by the window. I kicked off my shoes, sat on the bed, and tried to relax. My heart was still pounding. The images of that wooden house played over and over in my mind. I grabbed my camera and flipped through the photos. I scanned each shot looking for anything unusual. Most of them were just empty buildings, weathered wood, old signs. I saw nothing strange in the frames. Then I paused, paid on one shot of that wooden house. I zoomed in on the window, but all I saw was dust and warped reflections. No silhouette, no shape. Nothing yet. I couldn't shake the sense of being watched that night. I hardly slept. My dreams were muddled, flashes of empty windows, squeaking floors, and crunchy gravel. I woke up a few times, sweating and disoriented. I ended up pacing the room, checking my phone, looking out the window, and sipping lukewarm water. I felt drained. I wanted to leave right away. But I told myself I could handle one more visit to gather the last set of shots in the morning. Part of me wanted to understand this place, even though everything about it made me uncomfortable. Morning came and I finished packing my bags before I headed out. I tossed them in the car, planning to leave straight from the village. The air felt cold when I arrived. No sunshine yet. It was cloudy and the shadows made the buildings look even more decayed. I stepped out of the car and thought I heard a distant scraping sound. I paused, listened, but heard nothing else. My stomach felt tight again. I moved through the village one final time, taking photos at a faster pace than usual. I wanted a few extra shots of the collapsed porch, the alleyways, and maybe the mailbox with the scratched letters. I forced myself to approach that wooden house again, but I kept my distance. I tried to capture the peeling paint from across the road as I lined up the shot. I felt a sharp chill and my eyes started to water. I took a couple of photos and lowered my camera. That's when I heard a creak from inside the house, faint but clear. I swear my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I stepped back, my camera hanging around my neck. My throat felt tight. I glanced around, but no other person was visible. The house gave no sign of life, except that single noise. I heard nothing else. I swallowed hard, turned and walked toward my car. My legs felt heavy, but I tried to keep a steady pace. I didn't want to run. Reached the car, slid into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I stared at the houses for a few seconds. I felt sure the entire place was watching me, even though I couldn't prove it. My skin tingled and my forehead was damp. My breath came in. Shallow bursts. I started the engine, pulled onto the main road, and left that village behind. I didn't look back for too long. My mind kept replaying the sounds, that crunch of gravel behind me, the floorboard squeak, and the heavy thump I'd heard inside the wooden house. It all rattled me in a way I hadn't felt before driving away. I told myself I'd never return. I don't know what was going on in that village. I don't know if it was just paranoia, but I do know my body reacted like I was not wanted there. My heart still pounds when I recall those moments of silence broken only by footsteps that didn't belong to me. I never shared the photos online. I kept them on my hard drive. Sometimes I open the folder and look through them. They're just images of old houses, broken windows, and empty streets. But when I see them, I feel tension in my gut. I remember every crackle of gravel, every squeak of wood, and every strange noise that echoed in the silence, and I can't shake the feeling that the village was alive and paying close attention. The entire time, I never thought I'd stand alone in my friend's house at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out if I was hearing footsteps or just losing my mind. But that's exactly what happened. Let me tell you everything that went down step by step because it still feels fresh in my head, even though it's been a while since that night. My friend Eric asked me to watch his place while he went on a 2E trip. I'd done favors for him before, but never anything like this. This time he handed me a house key, showed me around, and explained how to arm and disarm his security system. The house was a simple 2-story place on a quiet street. The neighbors were pretty far off. There was a yard with a few trees, but nothing else that stood out. Eric told me I could sleep in the guest room upstairs, help myself to the food in the fridge, and basically treat the place like my own. He didn't make a big deal of it. He just said he appreciated my help. I told him no problem. I'd never had a reason to distrust his house or suspect anything weird about it. It looked normal. It felt normal. I went in expecting 2 quiet weeks and a chance to catch up on some reading and gaming. The first 4 days went fine. I'd wake up, eat some cereal, check on the house, and go to work. I always locked up behind me at night. I came back, watched TV, played some video games, and crashed in the guest room around midnight. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. The floors never creaked in a spooky way, the lights never flickered, the alarm never went off for no reason. It was just a regular, uneventful few days. I even started to wonder why Eric needed a house sitter since everything seemed so easy to manage. Then on the 5th night, something changed. I remember it was around 2 in the morning. I'd gone to bed late again, and I was in that half-asleep, half-awake state. All of a sudden, I heard a noise. It was like a faint series of steps on the upstairs hallway. At first, I thought it could be the house settling, or maybe I just imagined it. But after a few seconds, the steps got a little louder, like someone was walking on the floor outside my room. My heartbeat kicked up, but I tried to stay calm. I listened closely. The footsteps seemed to move from one end of the hallway to the other. I told myself it could be the wind or some weird plumbing noise, even though it distinctly sounded like a person's steps. I got up, grabbed my phone for light, and walked to the door. My palms felt clammy. I unlocked the guest room door and looked out into the hallway. Nothing was there. I looked to the left, then the right. It was dark, but I could make out the outline of the walls and the other doors. No movement. I stepped out and the floor gave a tiny creak which made my heart jump. I called out in a low voice, "Hello." I felt stupid for talking to no one, but I couldn't help it. Silence. I stood there for about a minute. Maybe more, just waiting. I heard my own breathing and the faint hum of the air conditioner. I didn't see anything strange. I finally went back to my room, locked the door, and tried to get back to sleep. I didn't sleep well that night, but nothing else happened the next day. I brushed it off. Maybe I was tired, maybe I just had a dream. I went to work, came back in the evening, cooked some frozen pizza, and watched TV. I tried to convince myself there was some logical explanation, like maybe an animal got into the attic or something. I didn't check the attic, though. I just tried to go about my day. Normally, night came again. I fell asleep around midnight, then at about the same time as the night before. 2, maybe 3 in the morning, I woke up to the same sound: footsteps. This time I froze in bed, my heart pounded, my skin felt cold. It was that same pattern of steps moving along the hallway back and forth like someone pacing. I told myself I should check, but I didn't feel like opening the door again. I just lay there, listening. My breath shallow after a minute or two, the sound stopped. I waited another few minutes, forced myself to relax, then eventually dozed off. The next morning I felt drained. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I wasn't thrilled about it. On the 7th night, the alarm went off. That was around 1 in the morning. The piercing sound blasted through the house. I jumped out of bed, threw on some pants, and ran downstairs. My ears were ringing. The alarm panel by the front door said there was an internal motion trigger that meant something. Inside the house had tripped the sensor. I turned off the alarm. I was sweating my chest tight. I did a quick sweep of the downstairs rooms with the flashlight on my phone. The kitchen looked normal. The living room was quiet. The study was empty. Nothing was out of place. I checked all the windows and doors. Everything was locked. I went upstairs and did the same. The bedrooms were in order. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. It made no sense. After that, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lights on, feeling anxious. My body felt tense. Around 3 in the morning, I decided to check the hallway upstairs again. I'd been up and down already, but I wanted to see if maybe there was a drafting problem or event that could cause weird noises. I walked up there, shining my phone's light along the walls. The air felt really cold in that corridor. It was weird because the rest of the house felt normal. The thermostat said it was 75 degrees, so it didn't make sense. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, my skin broke out in goosebumps, and I could actually see my breath a little. When I exhaled, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was such an unnatural chill, I couldn't come up with a good reason for it. I went back downstairs, double-checked the thermostat settings, and found everything in order. The AC was running normally. I didn't know how to explain the cold spot. Still, there was nothing more I could do, so I stayed in the living room, nodding off now and then until the sun came up. I thought about calling Eric to let him know, but I didn't want to freak him out. He was probably far away on some much-needed vacation. I figured I'd handle it over the next few nights. The footstep noises continued, always around 2 or 3 in the morning, sometimes louder, sometimes barely. There twice, I turned on every light upstairs to catch some explanation, but I never saw anything. The corridor would still feel ice cold, and it got to a point where I dreaded going up there. After dark, my routine became this anxious pattern of locking myself in the guest room and trying to sleep through any strange sounds, but it was hard to ignore them. My nerves were shot. I'd watch TV in bed until I passed out from exhaustion. Then I'd wake up to footsteps and feel that familiar jolt of fear in my chest. I started to wonder if I should move out and tell Eric I got sick, but I didn't want to leave him hanging. I also felt like maybe I was just overreacting. The house never showed any signs of actual break-ins. Nothing was stolen or broken. Maybe I was dealing with faulty wiring or a glitch in the security system. Maybe the weird hallway temperature was just a rare AC issue, even though it didn't feel rational. I clung to those explanations. I told myself to make it through the 2 weeks and then go back to my normal life on the last night. I woke up around 2 in the morning again. My mouth was dry, my heart was racing before I even opened my eyes. I had this sense that something was off the air. The room felt still and heavy. I sat up in bed, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and listened. Silence, no footsteps right then, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the hallway. I stayed like that for a few minutes, just sitting in the dark, gripping the sheets. Then I heard a soft click from the door to my room. It sounded like the door latch releasing, like someone was pressing down on the handle from the outside. I froze. My mind started spinning. I tried to focus on the doorknob, but it was dark, and I could only see a vague shape. Then came a slow creaking noise. It was the sound of the door moving. My stomach twisted. It wasn't a fast swing, more like a gradual push, maybe an inch or two. I saw a sliver of the hallway through the opening. I expected someone to peek in or something to happen, but it stayed half open. Just enough to confirm it had moved. My chest was pounding so hard it hurt. I got up quietly and switched on the table lamp. The door was definitely ajar. Even though I remembered locking it earlier, my hand was shaking when I reached for the handle. I yanked the door open. I looked into the hallway, shining the lamp's light around. It was empty. No one was there, but the air felt freezing, like standing in front of an open freezer. I could feel a slight breeze against my face, and I still couldn't see where it might be coming from. I fought the urge to yell or freak out. Instead, I backed away, grabbed my duffel bag, and started stuffing my clothes in it. I decided I was done as I packed. I could swear I heard something shifting in the hallway, like a footstep or a scrape on the floor, but it was faint. I tried to ignore it. My hands moved fast, throwing my things together in no real order. My chest felt tight and my breath came in quick bursts. My mind was on one track: get out of this house. I zipped up my bag, turned off the lamp, and walked out of the room. My body was tense as I stepped into the hallway. It was dark except for the small light from downstairs. I glanced left and right, still seeing nothing, but that cold feeling was intense, like a chill seeping into my bones. My neck tingled. I hurried to the stairs and made my way down, gripping the banister so I wouldn't trip in my rush. I reached the front door, disarmed the alarm, and stepped outside. The moment I got onto the porch, I felt my whole body relax a bit. The night air was warm, a sharp contrast to that icy hallway. I locked up the house, set the alarm again from the outside keypad, and got in my car. My hands were shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. I drove off, glancing at the rear-view mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see something behind me. The neighborhood was quiet and no one was around it. Looked like any ordinary summer night, except I was panicked and sweating. I ended up crashing at my own apartment. Even though it was small and cramped compared to Eric's place, I felt so relieved to be back in my own space. I didn't feel that strange weight or hear any odd sounds. I just felt safe. Eric was due back the next day. When he got in touch, I met him at his house that afternoon, gave him the key, and asked how his trip went. He was in a good mood, so I didn't want to unload everything on him. I told him the basics. I heard some noises at night and the alarm went off once, but there was no sign of a break-in. He said sometimes the sensors can be buggy. I didn't mention the footsteps, the freezing hallway, or the door opening on its own. I just said the house was fine overall, and I left it at that. He thanked me, offered me some money for the trouble, which I refused. I just wanted to put it behind me. I still think about it. Sometimes I try to figure out if there was a rational explanation for everything that happened. Maybe there was a faulty sensor or a draft in the house that made it extra cold in that corridor. Maybe I was tired and on edge, so I misheard things, but the way the door latch clicked and the way the door creaked open. Those moments still replay in my head, and I can't find a good explanation. It felt like someone or something was right there pressing the handle. I know what I heard, I know what I felt, and it was more than just a creaky old house. I never told Eric all of this. I didn't want to come across as paranoid or crazy. I also didn't want him to worry about sleeping in his own home. As far as I know, he's never mentioned anything strange happening there. Maybe it was a one-time thing, or maybe he just doesn't notice it all. I know is that I'm in no hurry to go back. If he asks me to house sit again, I'll probably find an excuse to say no. I don't mind doing favors for friends, but I'd rather not spend another night listening to footsteps. I can't explain, and feeling a chill that makes no sense. It's just not worth the stress. If that makes me sound superstitious, fine. I'd rather be safe than sorry. And that's the truth about what happened during my 2 weeks at Eric's house. I remember the first time I stepped into that basement, I thought the smell was the worst part. It was a mix of damp concrete, stale paper, and old cardboard. I never liked it, but it was my job. I was new at the company back then, and they told me I'd be in charge of the night shift. I didn't question it. I needed the money, and the position looked secure. After a few months, I got used to the quiet. I got used to the strange echoes. I got used to the sudden knocks when pipes expanded. But one night, something changed. I started hearing whispers. I was by myself, and the entire floor felt different, like there was another presence nearby. That's when everything shifted for me. I work for a big publishing house, and they store their archives underground. It's an old storage area with rows of tall shelves lined up against each other, leaving only a narrow space to pass through. The lights are dim. They use these old fluorescent bulbs that flicker and hum. The ceiling is low, and the ventilation system drips water in some spots. Whenever I walk around, my boots make a wet sound against the concrete. The place is cold, too. Even in the summer, the temperature down there never really warms up. My job is to check the inventory note, any new arrivals, and handle any deliveries that come in late. Sometimes shipping trucks come at odd hours, so I meet the drivers at the loading dock and guide them to the correct shelves. It's pretty straightforward. I normally follow a clipboard and a checklist, and then I sign off on everything one night around 2 a.m. I was walking along the far corridor. It's the one section of the B basement that almost never sees any activity. The shelves there are old and full of dusty boxes from decades ago. I remember the flickering bulb overhead. It kept buzzing louder than usual. I stopped to write down some box numbers. Then I heard a whisper. At first, I thought my ears were playing tricks on me. I turned around and aimed my flashlight at the shelves. There was nothing. I stood there listening. It was that kind of soft hissing sound that you can't quite make out, like a voice that's just out of range. My shoulders got tense, my stomach tightened. I wasn't sure if I should say something. I finally asked, "Hello, anybody here?" No answer, just the constant hum from the lights. I told myself it was probably a water pipe or the wind from the ventilation, but the sound felt too clear. It sounded like a person. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I walked a little farther and the whisper seemed to move with me. It was like it was retreating down the corridor. Every step I took, it seemed to stay ahead of me. I was holding my breath without realizing it. When I reached the end of the corridor, it was just a plain concrete wall, no exits, no doors. I looked around, shining my flashlight on the floor, on the shelves, and up at the ceiling. There was nothing, but I still felt that tightness in my chest. I felt a rush of relief when I heard the service elevator ding. I figured maybe it was the cleaning crew or one of the security guys, so I hurried back, but I didn't see anyone. The elevator doors were open and it was empty. The control panel had that faint glow. My flashlight started to feel heavy in my hand. I don't like admitting that I was nervous, but I was in that basement by myself, and there was no reason for the elevator to have opened without someone calling it. Still, I tried to brush it off. Sometimes the elevator acts up. It's old. The buttons stick, mechanical glitches happen. I told myself that and went back to my checklist. The rest of that night went by slowly. I stayed near my desk in the corner of the basement where there's a phone and a computer. I kept glancing around, checking the shadows between the shelves. My mind kept replaying the whisper, but I tried to stay focused on my tasks. Around 5 a.m. The shift ended and I went upstairs. I reported nothing unusual because I didn't want to sound crazy. I told myself it was just a weird moment. Maybe the echo of something from the ventilation. I went home and tried to forget about it. Over the next few nights, I started hearing more sounds. They weren't always whispers. Sometimes it was like faint footsteps behind the shelves. Sometimes it was like someone dragging a box. Other times it sounded like a soft scraping on the floor. Every time I checked, I found nothing. The corridor would be empty and everything would look the same as before. I kept thinking that maybe I'd find a pile of boxes tipped over or a tool left by the maintenance crew, but I never did. Everything was always in its proper place. At least as far as I could see, my body started reacting more intensely. My heart would race at the slightest noise. My hands would sweat. My legs felt weak when I walked down the tight aisles. I'd get a cold sensation in my chest whenever I had to enter that far corridor. At one point, I considered leaving my job, but I couldn't do it. I needed the income, and it wasn't like I had another position lined up, so I told myself to handle it. I told myself it was probably my imagination, or maybe something caused by lack of sleep one night. I decided to do a thorough check of the entire area from front to back. I wanted to get rid of that anxious feeling. I grabbed a bigger flashlight from the supply closet and set out to inspect every shelf, every row, and every corner. I started near the loading dock and worked my way toward the far corridor. I scanned the floors for anything unusual. I checked the boxes for tampering. I listened carefully for any voices or scraping noises. At first, everything seemed normal. The smell of damp cardboard was strong, but that was standard. I saw a few silverfish scuttling away from the light, but that was also common in a basement full of old paper. I heard the usual drip of water from a broken pipe in the ceiling. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but when I got to the far corridor again, I noticed something on the floor. It was a single smudge, like a dark streak. It wasn't large, but it looked fresh. I knelt down and touched it. It felt sticky. I couldn't tell if it was oil or something else. It didn't smell like anything familiar. I shined my FL flashlight around to see if there were more streaks, but that was the only one. It was positioned right in front of the last shelf on the left side. I moved the flashlight over the shelf looking for spills or damage. Nothing. I felt an urge to pull out some boxes and check behind them. I had this idea that maybe something had leaked, but all the boxes were sealed and dry. I didn't want to open them without cause, so I made a note on my clipboard about the sticky spot. I heard a sound behind me. It was like a footstep, just one. I shot upright and spun around. Nothing. I felt my pulse hammering. My temples started throbbing. The corridor was empty. I stood still, trying to hear anything else. My breathing was fast, and I could feel the muscles in my shoulders tightening. I whispered, "Is anyone here?" Then I realized my voice was shaking. No response, just the quiet hum of the lights. I looked at the end of the corridor, at that blank wall. I felt this intense pressure in my chest, like I was stuck in a tight space. I backed away from the wall and started walking back to the main area. My legs felt heavy. My mind was racing with questions. Was I losing? It was someone messing with me. I made it back to my desk. My cheeks were warm and my throat felt dry. I picked up the phone and thought about calling security, but then I stopped. What would I say that I heard a weird noise and saw a sticky spot? They'd sent a guard who'd just walk around for a few minutes and find nothing. I forced myself to calm down. I poured a cup of water from the cooler. I leaned against the desk. Taking slow breaths, I told myself it was probably a maintenance issue. Maybe someone had spilled something and didn't report it. The rest of the night was quiet, though. I kept looking over my shoulder. After a few more days, the occurrences got more frequent. I heard whispers or faint footsteps at least once a night. Sometimes the lights flickered in one section while everywhere else stayed normal. My body felt tense the entire shift. My shoulders ached from staying rigid. I jumped at every little creak. One evening, I got a late delivery around midnight. I remember feeling relieved to have some human company. The driver was a tall guy wearing a thick jacket, and he looked tired. I helped him unload a few boxes of manuscripts. We took them down on the freight elevator and placed them in the designated area close to my desk. He noticed how quiet it was and said, "You work here alone at night?" I nodded and told him it was part of my job. He shook his head and said he didn't. Envy me. Then he left, and I was alone again. The entire place felt colder after he left. I decided to keep busy with filing tasks. I kept hearing small noises like something tapping on wood. I tried to ignore it. My heart rate picked up again, and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. It was hard to concentrate around 3 a.m. I stepped away from my desk to check a row of shelves on the other side of the basement. My plan was to do one last inspection before finishing up. As I passed by the middle aisle, I noticed a box had shifted. It was halfway way off the shelf, ready to fall. I set my flashlight on the floor and tried to push it back into place, but it felt heavier than usual. I tilted it a bit, wondering if maybe it got wet. Then I realized someone could have moved it. I felt a chill spread from my shoulders to my neck. I looked around, nothing but the same rows of shelves. I slid the box fully onto the shelf, then grabbed my flashlight. That's when I heard a loud thump from the far corridor. I froze. My stomach turned. My ears started ringing. I didn't want to check it out, but I had to. I walked slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I stepped carefully, and my boots made a soft squeak. Against the damp floor, when I reached the corridor, I shone the light around the shelves, looked undisturbed. Everything was in place. I scanned the floor, and my beam landed on a small stack of folders that seemed to have fallen from a shelf. I approached them. They were scattered. Some paper was peeking out from the edges. I leaned over to pick them up, and then I heard a whisper again. It was right behind me. I spun around, and my flashlight beam shook. There was no one there. My chest was tight, and my legs felt weak. I yelled, "Who's there?" My voice echoed. No one answered. I felt my face grow hot. My arms were shaky. As I gathered the folders, I placed them back on the shelf. When I looked down, I saw that same kind of sticky residue on the floor near the wall. The spot was bigger this time, like something had dragged across the floor. It glistened under the flashlight. My nose twitched, trying to smell anything out of the ordinary. It just smelled like damp concrete and old paper. I didn't want to be there anymore. I wanted to get out, but my shift wasn't over. I left the corridor and rushed back to my desk. I didn't bother with the rest of the inspection for the next hour. I sat at my desk listening to every tiny sound. My body felt stiff, and my heart was still pounding every time I glanced at the elevator. I half expected it to open on its own again. I didn't even try to pretend I was calm. I felt the sweat soaking the back of my shirt. My mouth was dry. I just wanted the shift to end when the clock finally hit 5 a.m. I shut down the computer and headed upstairs. I passed the security desk on my way out. The guard asked how my night was. I just said quiet. Then I left. I was too tired and too rattled to explain anything. When I got home, I could still feel that weight on me, like something had followed me out of the basement. I couldn't stop replaying the sounds in my head. The whisper felt real. The footsteps felt real. The sticky marks on the floor were definitely real. I decided to tell my supervisor about it the next day. I described the noises, the strange elevator, behavior, and the sticky spots on the ground. He said he'd have maintenance check the basement for any leaks or broken pipes. He promised to send someone from security to do a walker, but he didn't seem too concerned. He just said these old buildings have a lot of strange noises. Since then, the feeling of being watched never left. Every night I sense someone behind the shelves. I sense movement where there shouldn't be any. The corridor feels suffocating, like the air is thicker in that spot. I don't have a better explanation. I keep doing my rounds, I keep signing off on deliveries, I keep checking inventory. But I also keep my ears open for that whisper, and I stay alert for any more sticky trails so far. I haven't caught anyone in the act, and I haven't found a source for any of these strange things now. Every evening before I start my shift, I stand by the elevator on the main floor and take a deep breath. I press the button and ride down, bracing myself for whatever I might find. I walk through the rows of shelves, double-check the lights, and listen, always listening. I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me. I can't shake the tension in my muscles. I just keep going because it's my job and I need it. But my nights are different now. The quiet isn't just quiet anymore, it's unsettling. I don't know what's down there or if it's all in my head. I only know that it's real enough to make my heart race and my palms sweat. And until I figure out what's behind those whispers and footsteps, I don't think I'll ever feel comfortable in that basement again. I got this gig because it sounded simple: organize a warehouse of mechanical parts at night with no distractions or foot traffic. The owner promised I'd have the place to myself. He said there wouldn't be any deliveries or pickups until morning. I thought it would be easy money. I was wrong. I'm standing in this huge metal building that smells like old oil and damp cardboard. The lights are harsh overhead fluorescents and they flicker once in a while. The first time I stepped inside, I noticed the rows of shelves packed with crates and bins of parts. Each row stretches nearly from one end of the warehouse to the other with narrow walkways in between. There are tall stacks of boxes along the walls. The floor is concrete stained with grease and grit. When I started, everything felt normal. I checked off boxes labeled shelves and wrote down items on a clipboard. Then I found sacks of parts that didn't match the inventory list. That was my first sign that something weird was happening. On my second night, I looked more closely at the sacks. Some were behind large crates, half hidden. But the seals had been opened recently. They were supposed to be sealed with these plastic bands, yet I saw fresh cuts. I even found small pieces of the plastic ties scattered around the floor. I felt uneasy, but thought maybe the owner had opened a few sacks himself or changed his mind about inventory. I figured I'd ask him later. I kept working, going through the official list and trying to reconcile the numbers. I stacked everything in neat piles around midnight. I heard a small clank near the back of the warehouse. It sounded like a tool dropping onto the floor. I didn't see anyone, so I shrugged it off as maybe some piece of metal shifting on a shelf. A couple nights later, I noticed something else: footprints. They were faint, but definitely there. Someone had stepped in greasy dirt, maybe from a corner where fluids had leaked, and walked from the far left corner to a workbench. Bent on the opposite side, the tracks didn't look old. In fact, I swear they were fresh, like someone had just walked by before I got there. The footprint size looked about the same as mine, maybe a bit smaller. I tried to trace where they came from, but the pattern vanished near a side door that leads into a cramped storage office. That door was locked from the inside, or at least I thought it was. I jiggled the handle. It felt secure. I don't like being in the dark about this kind of thing. I like to know if someone's messing around, so I got a roll of thin, clear tape from my car. Every time I ended my shift at around 5 in the morning, I'd put small strips of tape over the seam of each door. That way, if someone opened a door while I was gone, the tape would tear. When I came back the next night, I saw the tape on 2. Of the doors was ripped. One was the main entrance that I used, which made sense because I had to come in, but the other was a side door I never touched. The tear looked clean, as if someone opened the door carefully, but the padlock outside hadn't been tampered with. I felt a chill on the back of my neck when I realized that lock might not mean much if someone had a key or a way around it. At first I tried to brush it off. I asked the owner the next day if he'd been inside. During the off hours, he said no. He said he trusted me to handle it. I told him about the sacks and the footprints, and he just shrugged. He looked tense for a second, but he said he had no idea what that was about. He told me to keep working and let him know if anything else seemed off. I took him at his word, but I wasn't satisfied on my 5th night. Things got more intense. I was reorganizing a bunch of small washers, bolts, and screws into labeled plastic containers. The place was quiet, except for the buzz of the lights and the distant hum of traffic outside. I had a portable radio on the table next to me just to have some background noise. Suddenly I heard a loud crash from the back corner near the overhead doors used for loading trucks. It sounded like metal pipes falling onto concrete. The noise echoed through the whole building. My heart kicked up and I felt an adrenaline rush. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check it out. I walked between rows of shelves, scanning my light left and right. I saw shadows flickering on the boxes. My breathing got shallow. The air felt colder in that part of the warehouse, like a draft was coming in through the loading dock. I reached the back corner and found a stack of pipes on the floor. They'd been leaning against the wall, but now they were scattered. I looked around for any sign of movement. Nothing. I shined my flashlight at the overhead door, checking the edges for signs that someone forced it open. It was locked. The chain and padlock were still in place. I tried to stay calm, but my stomach felt twisted. I called out, "Anybody here?" My voice echoed. I waited, but no answer. I picked up the pipes, stacked them back against the wall, and kept an eye on the door. Then I noticed something that made my skin crawl, fresh footprints again. This time leading away from the pipes, heading deeper into the warehouse. I followed them for a few steps, but they faded near a pile of crates. I circled around, shining my light, trying to see if anyone was hiding. Nobody jumped out. The only sound was my own breathing. I heard a drip somewhere, like a slow leak from a pipe, or maybe leftover rainwater hitting a bucket. I stayed there for a minute, scanning the area, but saw no one. I felt vulnerable standing in that wide open space with the lights overhead. I moved back to my workstation, but I stayed on edge. That same night, I decided to step up my security check. I used the tape on every door. Again, I also placed small pieces of tape on certain containers and drawers, the ones that had been tampered with before. Then I went to the break room, a small side space with a couple of chairs and a vending machine. I sat for a while, ate a quick snack, and tried to steady my nerves. The sense of being watched wouldn't go away every few minutes. I jerked my head toward the door, expecting to see a face peeking around the corner, but I never did. After the break, I got back to organizing. The rest of the shift passed without more noises. The next day, I returned around the same time. Sure enough, some of the tapes were broken again. One on the side door, one on a drawer of specialized drill bits, and one on an old metal cabinet near the back. I opened the cabinet to check its contents. It mostly had older tools and some half-rusted spare parts. Everything looked jumbled, like someone had rummaged through. I felt my heart speed up again. There was no sign of forced entry, and the place was locked, just like I'd left it. I started to wonder if the owner was behind this, or maybe an ex-employee with a key. I began glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, feeling paranoid. That was when I started hearing faint taps or scratches on the far walls. At first, I thought it might be the building settling or rodents in the walls, but it sounded too deliberate. It would stop whenever I got close. I'd spin around with my flashlight, but there was nothing. My palms were sweaty and my mind rayed with different scenarios. Someone messing with me, someone hiding, maybe someone living in the warehouse without the owner's knowledge. The place was big enough. It had storage rooms, a small office, and even a second-floor loft with old shelving. Someone could easily hide there. I got tired of feeling jumpy, so I decided to confront the noise. I walked slowly toward the back area, stepping carefully to avoid making too much sound. My flashlight beam cut through the dark corners. The overhead lights lit most of the main floor, but some areas were dim or shadowed behind tall shelves. I listened for the faint taps, then I heard them. Again, behind a row of large wooden pallets stacked with boxes of engine parts. I rounded the corner and aimed the flashlight. Right then, I caught a glimpse of motion, a quick flash of movement. It could have been a human shape darting behind the crates. I felt my stomach tighten. I called out, "Hey, stop, who's there?" No answer, but I heard a soft rustling. I ran toward it, pushing aside a loose box. The floor was cluttered with old packing material by the time I reached the spot. It was empty. There was a strong smell of grease in the air. The rustling sound stopped. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. I stood there shining the light in every direction but saw nothing. I felt a burst of frustration. I yelled, "Come on, I know you're in here." I got only silence in return. The tension got to me. I decided to check the area of the warehouse where I'd seen footprints. I found some more prints leading toward a heavy metal door that said authorized personnel. Only it was locked, but I noticed greasy smudges on the handle like someone with oily hands had gripped it. I tried the handle and it turned, but the door didn't budge. It felt like something was blocking it from the other side. I considered pushing it harder, but I thought better of it. If someone was on the other side, I didn't want to corner myself. I backed away, feeling uneasy by now. My nerves were frayed. Every small noise made me jump. The hum of the fluorescent light seemed louder. My mouth was dry. I started thinking I needed to call the owner right away, or maybe the police, but I had no proof of a crime. Besides tampered sacks and footprints, I also didn't want to seem like I couldn't handle a simple inventory job. My pride held me back. After that, I tried to keep working. I labeled more bins, scanned through the official inventory sheets, and updated the paperwork, but my focus was shot every couple of minutes. I'd spin around, flashlight in hand, looking for shadows moving across the aisles. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in a metal surface and freak myself out for a second. I was wound tight. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. The worst part was not knowing who it was or what they wanted around 3 in the morning. I finally heard a series of sharp metallic bangs near the far side of the warehouse. It sounded like someone rummaging through toolboxes. I started walking that way, trying to be as quiet as possible, but the floor echoed every step. My boots scuffed the concrete. I reached the row of old toolboxes lined up along a bench. The bench was littered with wrenches, pliers, and half-disc disassembled. Some tools lay on the floor like they'd been knocked off in a hurry. My chest tightened when I realized that whoever was here had been trying to grab something and then ran off. As soon as they heard me coming, I scanned the area with my flashlight. I spotted fresh grease smears on the edge of the bench. One of the wrenches was still rocking slightly as if it had just been dropped. The air felt thick and stale. My heart drummed in my ears. I crouched down to look under the bench. Nothing. Then I heard movement overhead, a soft thump on the catwalk or the upper loft. I stood and aimed my flashlight up. The overhead lights didn't reach well. Up there, I could see old boxes in the outline of a railing, but no one in view. I took a step onto the metal stairs that led to the loft. Each step squeaked under my weight. At the top of the stairs, I paused. My flashlight lit a narrow walkway with more shelving units. The air felt even colder. I could see dust floating in the beam of light. My pulse hammered in my head. I heard a soft scrape behind a stack of boxes. I moved closer, feeling tension in my shoulders. "Show yourself," I said, trying to sound confident. Nothing. Then the lights flickered below, and for a split second the loft went dark, except for my flashlight beam. The lights came back and the scrape sound stopped. I froze, waiting after a moment. I heard a door slam on the far side of the W house. I went down the stairs, ran over to that side, but the place was empty again. My mind spun with questions. How did they vanish so fast? Did they slip out of back exit? By the time my shift ended, I felt exhausted, my nerves were shot, and my legs were weak. I checked the tapes on the doors. Several were torn. I replaced them with fresh pieces locked up and headed home. My head pounded with confusion and paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching every move I made. The warehouse felt claustrophobic. Even though it was huge, I had to keep working there. It was my job, and I needed the money every night since I felt on edge. The tension hasn't gone away. Sometimes I think I see shapes moving in the corners of my vision. I'll turn fast, but there's nothing there. Other times I'll hear the faint crash of metal on concrete and find tools scattered that were neatly placed before I keep telling the owner about it, and he just tells me to be careful. He claims no one else has a key. I don't believe him. But I don't have proof he's lying. I'm still there now. I'm sorting out a batch of nuts and bolts, trying to finish my shift. But every time I pause, I feel the weight of the silence around me, like the building itself is watching. I can't see anyone else, but I know I'm not alone. The footprints, the broken tape, the rattling tools, those aren't my imagination. Someone's here and they're not just passing by. They're lurking, watching, playing games with me. My heart won't stop pounding and every little sound sets me off. I'm tired of feeling hunted, yet I keep coming back because I need the paycheck and I can't prove anything yet. That's the situation. I don't know who's behind it or what they want, but each night it gets harder to stay calm. I catch myself looking over my shoulder constantly. The warehouse stays locked from the outside, but that doesn't matter if someone has their own way in. I've taped every door, window, and hatch I can think of, but I still find them broken or loosened when I return. Now I'm just waiting for the next noise, the next flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. The next time I find footprints leading to places I haven't checked yet, and I know that sooner or later I'll come face to face with whoever's in there with me. I just hope I'm ready when it happens. I never expected a house to make me feel so uneasy. The day I signed the paperwork, I felt a tightness in my chest. I couldn't explain. The house looked solid from the outside. The price was fair, the location suited me, but there was something about that basement. I remember walking down there during my first viewing. The agent flipped the light switch and I saw a row of old shelves stacked with dusty jars and rusted tools. The air felt thick, like stepping into a room where someone had just stopped talking. I pushed aside my nerves. I convinced myself it was just the musty smell of old concrete. I closed the deal a few weeks later. I moved my boxes in with the help of a couple of friends. We loaded the living room with furniture and left the heavier stuff for another day. Everything looked fine except for that basement. It always seemed colder than the rest of the house. Even though it was midsummer, I noticed a small draft like air was escaping through some crack in the walls. I planned to fix it, or at least find the source, once I had the time. A few days later, I decided to start setting up a workshop in that basement. I needed a place to store my tools, saws, and leftover wood. I had a simple plan to clear out the junk, maybe repaint the walls and add better lighting. The previous owner left some cheap wooden shelves that were full of random stuff, empty paint cans, a broken lamp, and an old radio that didn't work. I tossed out most of it. While clearing the corner near the furnace, I noticed a strange section of the wall. It was a rectangular patch that looked a little newer than the surrounding bricks. The lines of mortar stood out like it had been repaired. At some point, I tapped on it. The sound was hollow. I knocked on another part of the wall for comparison, and that had a dull, solid sound. The difference was obvious. I crouched down and ran my hand across the surface. There was a thin crack around the edges, almost invisible. Unless you looked closely, I felt a faint flow of air. It wasn't much, but enough to catch my attention. I spent the rest of that day trying to figure out what might be behind it. A hidden storage space. Maybe an old coal chute that got bricked over my mind. Wandered, I decided I'd finish cleaning up first. Then investigate. That night I sat in the living room and kept thinking about it. The possibility of a sealed compartment was too intriguing. I pictured hidden valuables or old letters left behind by a previous owner. The next morning, I went down to take some measurements. I wanted to see if I could find any records of home improvements or renovations. I set my tape measure against the floor near that patched wall. As soon as I crouched down, I heard a scraping sound. It was faint like metal against concrete. I froze, holding my breath. The basement was silent, otherwise I looked around. The furnace was off, the water heater wasn't making noise. I tapped the patched wall again, curious, but I heard nothing else. I stayed there for a few more minutes, waiting. No more sounds. I shrugged it off and continued my work. I ended up returning upstairs a short while later because something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. I remember my arms were goosebumped even though it wasn't cold. I told myself it was just nerves or the excitement of finding some hidden space. I tried to distract myself by unpacking other boxes. That afternoon, I decided to buy some tools to break through that patch. I drove to the hardware store, got a new chisel, a heavier hammer, and some safety gear on my way home. I felt this strange heaviness in my stomach, like I was dreading something. I parked my truck, sat there for a moment, and tried to shake it off. I reminded myself it was just an old wall. There was nothing supernatural about it. It was just bricks, mortar, and possibly a gap. I went back to the basement, but the sound of that scraping metal came back. It started the moment I flipped on the light. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent. It seemed to come from the other side of that patch. I took a step closer. The noise stopped. I felt a rush of adrenaline. My heart started pounding. I was sweating a bit. I didn't want to admit I was scared, but I was definitely uneasy. Every cell in my body told me to leave it alone for now, so I placed the chisel and hammer on my workbench and walked upstairs. I watched TV for a while. Trying to distract myself, I told myself I'd wait for a better time. Over the next couple of days, I focused on other parts of the house. I painted the living room and replaced a leaky faucet in the kitchen. I did my best not to think about that basement, but every time I needed a tool or wanted to check the breaker box, I had to go down there. Each time I stepped on the last stair, I felt that same heaviness. I heard those dragging sounds. It was like metal scraping on concrete, always in the same spot, always soft but clear enough to raise the hair on my arms. One day I even thought I heard a faint rattle of chains. I stood still. My eyes locked on that patch. I couldn't see movement, but I sensed it. At one point, I noticed my reflection in an old mirror the previous owner had left near the laundry area. My face was pale and my eyes looked tired. My shoulders felt tense. I realized I was letting some unexplained noise get under my skin. I shook my head and told myself enough. It's just a house. I decided to open it up, no more hesitation, so one afternoon I went down with a dust mask, my chisel, my hammer, and a flashlight. I dragged a portable work light over to the area. I moved some of the shelves out of the way to give myself more room. As soon as I touched the chisel to the wall, I felt this wave of dizziness. It was strong enough that I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. My vision blurred for a second and my stomach clenched. I dropped the chisel and backed away. I sat on the basement steps for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. The air felt thick and heavy, like there was less oxygen. My heart was racing. I wiped sweat off my forehead and tried to catch my breath after a minute or two. I felt my head clear. The dizziness subsided, and I told myself it must have been from not eating enough or from standing too quickly. But there was no mistaking the pressure in that room. It felt like the atmosphere in the basement had changed, like something was pressing on my ears. I picked up my chisel again, took a few shallow breaths, and set it against the wall. I tapped it lightly with the hammer. Some of the plaster chipped away. I watched flakes of paint and bits of mortar crumble to the floor. I tapped again, and the scraping noise returned. It was louder this time, like it was responding to me. My chest tightened. My instinct screamed at me to stop. I let the chisel drop. The sound of metal on concrete echoed, and I felt my stomach tense. I couldn't bring myself to continue. I've never been prone to panic attacks, but that moment came close. I grabbed my tools and rushed upstairs. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. I locked the basement door behind me and took a seat at the kitchen table. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. I was sweating. I kept telling myself there must be a logical explanation. Maybe there was a loose piece of ductwork rattling around, or maybe the neighbor's plumbing somehow resonated through that wall, but in the moment, none of those explanations mattered. I just knew. I felt shaken, like my body was warning me not to go any further. I decided to leave the basement alone for a while. I tried to ignore that patch. I convinced myself it wasn't urgent. I wanted to get my workshop set up, but I couldn't relax down there. I rearranged some things, stored my tools in boxes, and kept them near the stairs. I left the corner alone. The next time I went down, I only stayed long enough to flip a breaker. I avoided looking at that wall, even with everything else going on. That sealed space stayed on my mind some nights. I would lie awake picturing the shap of the bricks. I'd remember how hollow it sounded. I'd think about how the scraping noise happened at the exact moment I tried to break through. The memory of that sudden dizziness made my pulse quicken. My breathing would get shallow just from recalling it. I'd open my eyes and stare at the ceiling, telling myself it was just fear of the unknown. Last weekend, I tried one more time. I thought maybe if I opened just a small hole, I could shine a flashlight in and see what was behind there. I went downstairs around midday. I took a deep breath, set up my work light, and started to scrape away the plaster around the edges of the patch. Within seconds, I felt my ears pop like the air pressure had dropped again. The basement felt colder. My hands started to tremble. My breathing got faster, almost like I was hyperventilating. I told myself to calm down. I forced myself to slow my breathing. My palms were sweaty. My legs felt tense, ready to bolt at any second. The scraping started again, a slow, steady drag of metal on stone. It was so close that it might as well have been inches away. My heart thumped in my chest. I felt warmth spreading across my forehead, and I realized I was breaking into a heavy sweat. My vision blurred a little. I couldn't stay focused. I dropped the putty knife I was using and braced myself against the wall. I felt a chill on my arm. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something about that spot was too overwhelming. My body was giving me clear signs that I was pushing my luck. I felt short of breath, like I was underwater. My ears still felt blocked, and the scraping sound continued until I stepped away from the wall. Then it stopped all at once. It was dead silent. Except for my own breathing, I gathered my tools as quickly as I could. I turned off the lights, slammed the basement door, and locked it again. I stood in my kitchen for several minutes, shaking, trying to get my pulse back under control. My clothes were damp with sweat. I felt drained, like I had run a marathon. Now I avoid that basement unless it's absolutely necessary. I still store some things down there, but I only go in and out flipping the light switch off before I let my eyes wander to that corner. I haven't tried to chip away at that patch again. Sometimes I think I should just hire someone to break it open and deal with whatever's inside. Then I remember how that scraping noise feels in my gut. It's like a knife twisting in my stomach. It isn't natural, it doesn't feel right, and I'm not a believer in anything beyond the ordinary. But I know what I felt. The rest of the house is fine, the plumbing works, the wiring needs a little updating, but that's normal in older properties. The floors creak a bit, but I can deal with that. It's just that one spot in the basement that sets me off. The sealed compartment remains unopened. I can't bring myself to go near it anymore. Every time I even think about heading down with a hammer, my hands start shaking. My mouth goes dry. I'm not sure if I'll ever open that section of the wall. I know it's there, and I know there's something behind it, but I can't handle the reaction it causes in me. The heaviness, the vertigo, the scraping of metal. None of that seems worth it. I don't want to find out what's on the other side. I'm not curious anymore. I'm just wary. Sometimes if I'm in the living room with the TV off, I swear. I hear a faint dragging sound coming through the vent that leads to the basement. It makes me tense up. I'll wait, holding my breath, and after a moment it goes quiet. I've started to think I should sell the place. I haven't listed it, but the thought is they're creeping into my mind. The house is nice, but that basement is a problem every day. I stay here, I'm aware of that sealed patch. I pass the basement door on my way to the kitchen, and my stomach does a little flip. It's like I'm waiting for something bad to happen. I hate feeling this on edge in my own home, but for now I'm just living with it. I've got a padlock on the basement door. Even though I know that's pointless, it's more symbolic, I guess. At least it keeps me from going down there impulsively. Maybe one day I'll build up the nerve again, maybe I'll forget this fear. But I doubt it every time I think about that patch. I remember the scraping. I remember the heavy feeling, the dizziness, the sweat beating on my forehead. I feel the tension in my shoulders and the pounding of my heart, and I decide it's better to leave it sealed, so that's where things stand. I'm living in a house with a basement that unnerves me. I've tried to open up that hidden space, but I couldn't push through the feeling. Now I just leave it. I can't tell anyone the full story without sounding unhinged. So I keep it to myself and pretend everything's normal, but it's not normal. There's something about that patch in the wall, something that makes me feel uneasy. Just thinking about it, I don't think I'll ever find out what was left behind, and part of me is relieved. I moved to this place a few weeks ago, and I thought I knew what I was signing up for. I was wrong every night after midnight. Something out there moves through the orchard. It never shows itself. It never leaves any footprints, but I hear it. I feel it. And the worst part is, I can't prove it to anyone else during the day. I check on the trees. They're old, but they still have strong trunks and decent branches. The orchard used to belong to the previous owner's family, but they let it go to waste. The ground is dry in some spots, and in other spots it's soft enough to sink into when it rains. I spend most of the morning and afternoon clearing weeds, pruning dead branches, and watering the areas that need it. I drive my small truck around with a water tank and a hose, which I connect to a pump near the well. Sunlight is fierce and I sweat a lot, but it feels good to work with my hands. By late afternoon, I usually finish. I clean my tools, store everything in the shed, and head to the small house on the far end of the property. It's a plain one-story structure with 2 rooms. The kitchen and living area are combined, and there's a cramped bedroom in the back. The windows are barred, not in a decorative way, but in a practical way. There used to be stories about thieves sneaking in and taking whatever they could carry. I didn't think much of it when I first got here, but now I'm glad those bars are there when the sun goes down. I lock the doors, I make some dinner, usually something simple like beans, rice, and a piece of meat. If I'm lucky enough to find something fresh in town, there's no one else around. The closest neighbor is about 3 miles away. At first, the solitude was relaxing. Now it bothers me a bit. I have to be on guard because there's no one to call for help in a hurry after dinner. I sometimes sit outside on the small porch. There's a thin wooden bench there. The orchard spreads out in front of the house, and I can barely see the fence on the other side because it's so wide. The trees stand in neat rows, but at night they all blend into a mass of dark shapes. The moonlight helps a little sometimes. I see the silvery outlines of the leaves, but it's still hard to make anything out. That's when I start hearing the first signs of movement, a crack of a twig, or the rustling of branches. At first I assumed it was a stray dog or maybe a raccoon, but it never feels that simple. One night I decided to do something about it. I grabbed my flashlight and my old hunting knife, which I keep on me just in case I stepped off the porch, walked between the rows of trees and looked around for any sign of a person or an animal. I heard dry leaves getting crushed underfoot, but I couldn't see anything. I pointed my flashlight in all directions. Nothing. I tried calling out, no answer. Then I heard the sound again, closer this time, like someone stepping carefully to avoid being noticed. My chest felt tight. I called out again. Louder still. Nothing. I swung my flashlight in a wide arc. The beam landed on some branches, the ground, the fence line, and back to the rows of trees. There was no shape, no figure. It was just empty space in the orchard floor. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear my heartbeat drumming in my ears. Then I heard the sound of footsteps again, only a few yards behind me. I spun around. Nothing. I went back inside. My hands were trembling. My flashlight beam was shaking. When I sat down on the couch, I realized my shirt was soaked with sweat. I stayed up until dawn that night, jumping at every little noise. I told myself I'd install some motion sensor lights or even a camera system around the orchard. The next day, I drove into town and checked prices, but they were too high. I decided to do things the old-fashioned way. Scout the area, keep my flashlight ready, and try to catch whoever or whatever was out there. I tried a different tactic the following night. Instead of walking around, I stayed hidden behind a group of trees near the middle of the orchard. I kept the flashlight off and just waited, crouched behind one of the thicker trunks. I had my back against the rough bark and I tried to control my breathing. After a while, I heard a slight shuffle on the ground like someone testing a step. My body tensed. My heart started thumping harder. I could feel adrenaline coursing through my veins. I slowly reached for the flashlight. I counted to 3 in my head and switched it on, swinging it around. There was nothing there, only the empty rows. My legs were cramped from staying in the same position, but I forced myself to hold still for another hour. I heard more noises, whispers, but not real words. Just a faint sound of air moving against something. It could have been the wind, but it felt too deliberate back at the house. I paced around my small living room trying to figure out what was happening. My stomach was twisted in knots. I tried to eat something, but I couldn't get past a few bites. I thought about calling someone, maybe the local sheriff or a friend in town, but I didn't know how to explain the situation. I hear footsteps, but there's nobody there. It sounds crazy. Still, I made a note to mention it next time I saw the sheriff in town just to see if he had any advice. The day passed like every other day. I worked on the orchard, loaded my truck with some fallen branches, burned a pile of them near the fence, and tried to keep busy that night. The noises started later than usual. Close to 2 in the morning, I was inside the house reading an old magazine and I heard a soft shuffle right outside the window. I froze. I turned off the light in the room. The inside of the house became pitch dark. My eyes adjusted slowly. I heard something brushing against the wall outside, maybe a hand or a body sliding by. My palms felt sweaty and I reached for my knife. I didn't want to open the door. Right away, I walked quietly to the window and peeked through a gap in the curtain. The yard was dimly lit by moonlight. I didn't see any shape or shadow that looked like a person. The fence gate was closed. I stared at the orchard, trying to catch any movement among the trees, but it was too dark. Then a sudden thump made me jump. It came from the side of the house near the corner. It sounded like someone banging on the wall with a fist or a stick. I almost dropped the knife. I swallowed hard and took a breath when I looked again. Nothing was there. The thumping stopped. I couldn't sleep after that. I stayed up until sunrise, just sitting on the couch with a knife in my hand. My back hurt from being so tense when morning came. I stepped outside. Everything looked calm. I walked around the house to check for damage, but didn't find any dents or scratches. The orchard looked the same as ever. No broken branches, no disturbed patches of dirt, no footprints. The only prints I saw were my own from the day before. It was frustrating. I felt like I was losing my grip on what was real. Over the next few days, I set up some makeshift traps around the orchard. I used pieces of rope tied to empty cans. If someone tripped over the rope, the cans would clatter and alert me. I placed them near the fence and along a few rows where I'd heard the footsteps. I also put some flour on the ground in small circles, hoping to catch any footprints after sundown. I watched from my bedroom window. The wind rustled the leaves and I heard a few normal night sounds. Crickets, maybe a distant coyote, but nothing unusual. Around midnight, I heard the faint clinking of one of the cans. My chest seized up and I rushed outside with the flashlight. I scanned the area. The rope was still there. The cans were still there, but they'd moved a bit. Like someone had nudged them. I spotted a trail of flour a few feet away, but it didn't look disturbed. I crouched down to inspect the ground. No footprints, no scuff marks. I stood up and felt a chill on my arms. I whispered, "Where the hell are you?" I spent the rest of the night awake, patrolling the orchard. Every half hour I walked in circles with the flashlight, shining it into every corner behind every tree. Occasionally I heard a rustling or something that sounded like breathing, but I never caught sight of anyone. My legs grew tired, my head ached. My heart pounded so much that it felt like I was sprinting. Even though I was just creeping around the next morning, I was exhausted. I dragged myself through my chores, half asleep on my feet. At one point, I thought about quitting and leaving the property. I didn't sign up for this. I came to take care of trees, pick fruit, maybe sell some of it. I wanted a peaceful place away from city noise, but each night was turning into a standoff against something I couldn't identify. The orchard itself looked perfectly normal in daylight. The trees were quiet, the air smelled of leaves and dirt, the fence was intact. I kept telling myself maybe it was just animals, but animals usually leave tracks and they don't thump on walls like that. I started staying inside the house after dark. Locking every window, I kept all the lights on. At first, it made me feel safer, but it also made it easier for whatever was out there to see me. I turned off the lights one by one and stared outside. My phone had no signal out here, so I couldn't call anyone in the middle of the night if I needed to. I just sat listening. Each time I heard a crack or a shuffle, my stomach tightened, my hands became sweaty, my muscles tensed, ready to jump. Sometimes I'd grab the flashlight, open the door, and shine it around nothing. Other times I'd try to ignore the noises. Neither choice made me feel better once around 1 in the morning. I mustered the courage to stand on the porch for a few minutes. I just wanted to see if I could spot anything moving among the trees. The porch light cast a weak glow on the ground. My eyes scanned the distance. I saw the outlines of the orchard. Rose, the sky was clear and the moon was bright. I took a few steps down. The wood creaked under my feet. Then I heard a sudden rush of movement near the fence line. Leaves swishing, branches snapping. It sounded like a person sprinting. I called out, "Hey," but I didn't move any closer. My legs locked in place. The noise stopped as fast as it had started. I waited, shining the flashlight, listening for breathing or any other sign of life. Nothing came back. I backed up to the door, stepped inside and locked it. That pattern repeated itself on most nights. I tried different strategies. Keeping the lights off all night, leaving them on, patrolling, staying put. But I never saw a person or an animal. The orchard remained calm during the day. I found no signs of forced entry, no broken fruit, no stolen tools. Yet every time I let my guard down after midnight, I'd hear something moving, whispering or banging on the walls. My sleep schedule became chaotic. I'd crash for a few hours in the early morning, then work all day in a tired fog. My appetite shrank. The tension in my shoulders felt constant, like a knot right near my spine. My eyes grew dull from lack of rest. One afternoon, I considered setting up a tape recorder or even buying a trail camera, but I hadn't saved enough money for decent surveillance equipment, and the cheap stuff wasn't worth the trouble. I told the local sheriff what I'd been experiencing, and he just shrugged. He said he'd send someone by if they got a chance, but they were short-staffed that same day. I tried warning the neighbor who lived a few miles down the road. He said he never heard anything strange at night, but he also admitted he slept with the TV on and never really paid attention. No help there now. Every evening, I watch the sun go down with a tight feeling in my chest. I clean my tools and store them. I lock the shed, lock the house, double-check the fence. I eat a small meal, and then I brace myself. I sit and wait. Sometimes I read to distract my mind, but the slightest noise makes me jump. Sometimes I think about sleeping in my truck, driving off if anything happens. But I've never actually done it. Something about this place keeps me pinned here, like I need to prove that I'm not scared off so easily still. The sounds continue. Footsteps on dry leaves, faint, whispers. Light knocks against the walls. It never ends. And when I look, there's never anyone there. I don't know what else to do. I haven't found a solution, and I can't pretend it's normal, but I also can't leave. Just yet, the orchard needs someone to take care of it, and I said I would do this job, so that's where I'm at. Waiting for another night, another round of noises. I can't explain, hoping I don't lose my nerve so far. I'm still here, but it's getting harder to stay calm. The nights keep dragging on, and those whispers don't stop. I just wonder if they ever will. I heard the first strange noise last month right at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a scraping sound above my bedroom, sharp and repetitive. I thought it was a bird pecking on something. I was half asleep, so I rolled over and tried to ignore it, but it happened again the next night, and the next now. I can't get a full night's rest without thinking about those sounds on the roof. It's driving me insane. I live in a small apartment on the top floor of an old building downtown. The building has 6 floors and the elevator is slow, so I usually take the stairs. The hallways smell a bit musty and the windows are narrow. The place has history, but it's not well maintained. The paint on the walls is peeling and the doors. My apartment is a single bedroom unit with a cramped living room, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom that always seems damp. It's not fancy, but it's close to my job. I work as a night security guard at a parking garage a few blocks away, so I sleep late in the mornings and stay up during odd hours. That's probably why I'm the only one hearing these sounds. At first, I told myself it was just the wind or a stray cat. I talked to the superintendent, Mr. Gonalves, but he said nobody has gone up to the roof in months. He said the only way to the roof is through a locked access door at the end of the top floor hallway. He has the key, but he swears he hasn't opened it for a long time. I remember asking him about rats. He said the building's pest control was regular and thorough. He seemed sincere, and he even showed me the log of inspections from last year. There was no mention of any animals in the attic or on the roof still that didn't calm me. I kept hearing the noises. Some nights it sounded like scraping metal. Other nights it was a thumping that made my window rattle. It always happened past midnight, especially around 2 or 3 in the morning. I got fed up after a week of broken sleep one night. I waited for the noise to start. It was a Wednesday and I had the following morning off around 2:30. I heard faint scratching right over my bed. My heart pounded. I sat up in bed, ears alert. The scratching came in short bursts, followed by silence. Then I heard a soft knocking. I got out of bed, pulled on a pair of sweatpants, and headed to the door. My legs felt stiff and my stomach tightened with every step. I grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer and walked into the hallway. The hallway lights were off, so everything was dim. Only a weak bulb at the far end of the hall was working. I saw the door to the roof access at the end, past 2 other apartments. I could hear my own breathing. It sounded rough and uneven. I realized I was a little scared, but I pushed that aside and moved forward. The floorboards creaked under my slippers. I tried to be quiet, but my footsteps echoed in the empty corridor when I reached the access door. I paused. I didn't have the key, and I knew it was always locked, but I tried the handle anyway. It didn't budge. I stood there for a moment, listening. Everything was dead silent. The quiet made my skin crawl. My ears felt strained, like I was searching for the faintest sound. After a few seconds, I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. I don't know why I knocked. I guess I wanted to see if there would be a reaction. I heard nothing then. I shined the flashlight at the edges of the door. The paint was old and flaking, but there was no sign of forced entry. No fresh scratches on the wood. I even checked the floor for footprints or debris. It was just dusty. I felt my arms tingle. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or more unsettled. I ended up going back to my apartment the rest of the night. I stayed awake in bed, waiting. The sounds didn't return that night, but they came back the next night over the following week. My routine became a cycle of anxiety. I tried earplugs. I tried sleeping with the TV on. Nothing helped. I usually heard the noises around 3 or 4 times a week, always at random intervals. Sometimes it was a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the roof. Other times it was more like tapping on the ceiling. It always stopped the moment I got out of bed to investigate. I told some neighbors about it, but they hadn't noticed anything. Most of them are older folks who sleep early 1 or 2. Shrugged it off and said the building was old and had its creaks, but the noise I heard was distinct. It wasn't a pipe rattling or the wind. It sounded intentional, like someone or something actively moving around. I kept going back to the idea of an animal, but I hadn't seen droppings or fur, and the noise sometimes felt too strong for a small creature. One night it sounded like pounding, which made me jump out of bed and nearly drop my phone. I tried recording the noise on my phone a couple of times, but each time the sound stopped before I could hit record. Eventually, I decided I had to see the roof for myself. I caught the superintendent one morning and asked to borrow the key. He looked surprised but didn't argue. He handed over a long rusty key with a tag that said roof access in faded letters. He told me to be careful. I said I just wanted to check for loose shingles or something that might be making noise. He shrugged and walked away. That same afternoon, I went up to the top floor. It was daylight and everything seemed normal. I unlocked the roof access door, stepped outside, and squinted in the sun. The roof was flat with a few vents and some old air conditioning units. There was a low ledge around the perimeter about waist high. I walked the entire length of the roof looking for damage or signs of animals. The surface was a bit grimy with some small puddles. From recent rain, I didn't see any footprints or trash that might suggest someone was squatting up there. I checked the corners, examined the vents, and even climbed on a short ladder to peek into a ventilation shaft. It was empty. Everything seemed normal. The only odd thing I noticed was a small rusted hatch near one of the vents, but it was sealed with a padlock that looked decades old. I tugged on it, but it didn't move. I stayed on the roof for a good hour, waiting to see if I heard anything. Nothing happened. No strange noises, just the hum of city traffic below and the occasional breeze. I went back downstairs, locked up, and returned the key to the superintendent. He asked me if I found anything, and I said, no. He nodded. Without much interest that night, I felt a little more relaxed, reeled. I thought maybe the noises had stopped, but around 3 in the morning I heard it again. A solid scraping sound like metal against concrete. I jolted upright. My heart thumped and my chest felt tight. I got out of bed and stood in my living room listening. The noise repeated 3 times, then stopped. My palms were sweaty. I looked at my front door, debating if I should run up the hallway stairs again. I decided to do it. I wanted to catch whoever was making that sound. I left my apartment in a hurry. I didn't even grab my slippers or my flashlight this time. I just went out in my socks. The hallway was dark as usual. My hands were shaking. I felt a light tremor in my legs, but I pushed forward. I rushed toward the access door and tried the knob locked. I pressed my ear to the door. I heard a faint clicking noise like nails against something hard. My scalp tingled, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. The sound was very close. Maybe on the other side of the door. I whispered, "Hello?" No reply. I braced myself and banged on the door. "Who's there?" Silence. I pressed my ear again. Nothing. I hurried back to my apartment to grab my phone. I dialed the superintendent's number, but he didn't pick up. It was too late at night. I thought about calling the police, but I hesitated. I wasn't sure if that was an emergency worth reporting, and I didn't want to look like an idiot. I ended up pacing around my apartment until dawn, checking the ceiling every few minutes. I never heard another sound that night in the morning. I felt exhausted, like I hadn't slept in days. My back was sore and my eyelids felt heavy. I went downstairs and waited by the superintendent's office until he showed up. I told him what happened. He gave me a worried look, but said he hadn't heard anything. I asked if someone else might have a spare key. He said only he and the building manager had access. The building manager was out of town for a week. I asked if he would come up with me that night if we heard the sounds again. He agreed. That night I tried to rest. I fell asleep around midnight. Sure enough, around 3:30 I woke up with a jolt. A loud thud echoed from above. My pulse raced. I grabbed my phone and called the superintendent. He answered on the second ring, sounding groggy. I told him it's happening again. "Meet me on the top floor." He said, "Okay." I grabbed my flashlight and hurried out. He arrived a minute later, hair disheveled, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. He was carrying a heavy flashlight and had the key in his other hand. We both stood at the door listening. I pointed at the ceiling, trying to show him the direction of the sounds. It was quieter now, but there was a faint rustling or scraping. He gave me a nod, then unlocked the door. We stepped into the staircase that led up one more flight to the roof. The tension in my chest got worse. My breathing felt shallow. The superintendent's face looked tense. We reached the final door to the outside. He turned the key, pushed the door open, and shined his flashlight around. We stepped onto the roof. It was dark. The city lights reflected off of few metal surfaces. We walked slowly, checking every corner. I felt a cold sweat on my neck. I expected to see something move in the shadows, but everything was still. My teeth were clenched and my grip on my flashlight was so tight my knuckles hurt. We covered the entire roof looking behind the air conditioning units, checking the sealed hatch tapping on the vents. We didn't see any sign of forced entry or disturbance. There was only the distant sound of traffic. I glanced at the superintendent. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. We stood there for a minute, scanning every inch of the roof. Nothing. We went back inside. He locked the door again and handed me his flashlight so I could look around the stairwell. It was empty. No footprints, no trash, no sign of a person. We both stood there, shoulders stiff. Eventually, he sighed and went back to his apartment. I returned, turned to mine over the next few days. I tried to forget about it. The noises came and went. Sometimes I heard faint scratching. Other times it was stronger, like thumping. Each time I tried to investigate, it stopped. My chest would tighten and my hands would get clammy. I started losing sleep and my performance at work suffered. I was on edge all the time. I snapped at a coworker for no reason. Every night I lay awake waiting for the sounds. 2 nights ago, something changed. I was lying in bed at around 2 in the morning. My eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. I heard a soft clanking noise like metal hitting metal. I got up, heart pounding, and walked to my living room. The sound was louder. There I looked at my ceiling light fixture and noticed a slight flicker. Then I heard a loud thud, as if something landed on the roof right above me. I jumped back, feeling my chest. Hammer, I ran to my door, stepped into the hallway and listened. The building was silent except for a distant hum of someone's TV. I took a few slow steps toward the access door, but I stopped halfway. I was too tired to run up again and find nothing. My breathing felt rough. My legs felt weak. I turned around and went back to my apartment. The sounds continued for another minute, maybe 2, then faded. I sat on my couch wide awake until morning. I still don't have an explanation for the noises. I've considered calling the authorities, or maybe getting a professional to inspect the roof. But part of me thinks it's pointless. I've already checked up there with the superintendent. There's nothing. I can't figure out why these noises happen only in the early morning hours and always stop when I go to investigate. The superintendent insists no one else has a key and there's no other way up. My neighbors claim they haven't heard a thing. I keep waiting for a night when I'll catch whoever or whatever is up there, but it never happens. I lie awake, my heart thawing, and I listen. Sometimes the noises last longer and get louder. I feel my pulse. Rush, my scalp tingles. I clutch my phone or my flashlight. I picture something prying the shingles or moving the metal ducts. But I never see it. Every time I open the door, there's just darkness and silence. The fear is growing, but so is my frustration. I don't know how to make it stop now each night. I feel the dread in my stomach before I hear anything. I stare at the ceiling. My hands shake my forehead. Sweats, I think about all the steps I've taken. I keep replaying them. Searching for something I missed, but I come up blank. The building is old, but it's solid enough. The roof is locked up tight. The superintendent is just as public puzzled as I am. Yet the noises won't stop, and I'm left with this constant tension in my chest. I don't know where it's heading, but I can't ignore it anymore right now. It's nearly 2. In the morning, I'm sitting in my living room typing this out on my phone. Waiting, my back hurts and my eyes are sore. The building is quiet, my windows are closed, my lights are off. I'm just waiting for the next scrape or knock. I'm sure it will come soon, and I'll get up, heart-racing, hands shaking, ready to chase after it again, only to find nothing. I don't know if I'll ever figure this out, but I can't shake the feeling that something or someone is up there and it's not going away. I heard the hollow echo of my own footsteps. The first time I walked into that old hospital building, the place had the smell of dust and stale air. I remembered pausing for a second in the lobby, wondering if I should really take that temporary security job, but I needed the money and I've never been the type to turn down work. I told myself it was just another shift, just another empty building. I had no clue how wrong I was. I'm a 37-year-old guy from a small town. I'm no stranger to late nights and quiet halls. Before this gig, I worked security at a shopping mall that was usually easy-board teenagers, lost tourists, maybe a shoplifter, but this hospital was different. It had been shut down for a while and was scheduled for major renovations. The contractor needed someone to keep an eye on it. At night, the job sounded straightforward. Walk around every couple of hours, lock all the doors, make sure nobody was sneaking in to steal old equipment or copper wires. I showed up on my first night around 10 p.m. The lights in the main corridor worked, but half the building was under construction. Ructions, so entire sections were dark. I had a flashlight, a ring of keys, a thermos of coffee, and my phone. The first thing I noticed was how silent it felt. Not just quiet, silent. No hum of air conditioning, no beeping from monitors. Nothing. Every sound I made felt louder than it should. My boots on the tile floors, the jingle of my keys, even my breathing. I checked the ground floor first. There were old patient rooms with peeling paint, dusty waiting areas, and some broken chairs. The windows had boards on them. In a few places I saw piles of construction materials in corners. Buckets of paint, stacks of tiles, and random tools. I locked a couple of doors that led to storage rooms and made a note on my clipboard. Then I took the elevator to the second floor, but it jerked in a strange way, so I decided to use the stairs. From then on, I wasn't in the mood to get stuck in an elevator in a place like that. The second and third floors were mostly the same dark corridors, scattered debris, and old signs pointing to what used to be wards. I locked everything up, double-checked the rooms, and made a list of anything that looked out of place. Then I settled in the old security office on the first floor. That place had a desk, a few monitors, most of which were powered off or not connected, and a creaky swivel chair. I spent the rest of the night sipping coffee, watching some videos on my phone, and occasionally heading out for another round. Nothing happened. It was boring, but I preferred it that way. The second night was almost the same. I did my rounds. Found nothing unusual and spent most of the time in the security office. The third night, I heard some weird clanging sounds in one of the back corridors. It sounded like metal pipes. I walked over to investigate and found a half-open supply closet with some loose pipes. Leaning against the wall, one of them had fallen and made a noise. I pushed it aside, closed, and locked the closet and went back to my seat. My shift ended at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I drove home feeling a little tired but not spooked. Around the end of my first week, I got more used to the building. I knew which floors made weird sounds, which corners were cluttered with debris, and where the light still worked. But I also started feeling uneasy in certain areas. There was one corridor on the third floor with a row of empty patient rooms. Every time I walked through there, I felt pressure in my chest. My breathing got tight and I got goosebumps. I told myself it was just the stale air or maybe some leftover chemicals from old cleaning supplies, but I tried to avoid going down that hallway alone in the dark. I stuck to the main route when possible. Then came the night I can't explain. It was after midnight. I think it was around 2:30 a.m. I was bored in the security office, flipping through old magazines I found in a drawer. I decided to do my regular round, so I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and checked the first floor. I then walked up the stairs to the second floor. My plan was to walk the perimeter, check all the doors, and come back down. I walked slowly, shining my flashlight on the walls and corners. The overhead lights were off in that section. Because of the renovation, I passed by a small break room, then a wide hallway that led to some administrative offices. I tried a few doorknobs, all locked. I went around a corner that opened into a larger corridor. It was long and dark with a single flickering light at the far end. I heard my own footsteps echo. I remember the squeak of my boots. The air felt colder than usual. I could see my breath in front of me. I thought maybe a window was open or broken somewhere. Letting in the night air, as I got closer to the end of the corridor, I saw a door that looked slightly ajar. It was almost at the very end of the hallway near the corner. I was certain I had locked that door earlier. I had checked all doors on the second floor around 11 p.m. to make sure they were secured. My heart started beating faster. I wondered if maybe a worker came in during the day and forgot to close it properly, but it looked half open, not just unlocked. I approached slowly. My flashlight beam danced on the walls. My mouth felt dry and I could hear my pulse in my ears. I tried to keep my steps quiet, but the tiles made that impossible. As I got closer, I felt a cold breeze move past me like a sudden draft. The door creaked louder, as if something was pushing it from the other side. I was about 10 feet away when I heard a low scraping sound like metal dragging against the floor. I froze for a second, trying to figure out if I should call out or just keep walking. I decided to call out. My voice shook a little. Anybody there? Hello? I waited, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no voice. Just the hum of my flashlight and that occasional flickering overhead light. I moved closer. The door was maybe 2 feet open. Now I saw darkness inside the room looked abandoned. No furniture, no equipment, just empty space. I took one step forward, shining the flashlight in. That's when the door started to move. It swung shut in one quick motion, slamming so hard that I felt the vibration in my chest. I jumped back, my heart pounding. The door missed my face by inches for a moment. I just stood there, breathing hard. I tried the doorknob. It was locked. I jiggled it and it wouldn't budge. I got the keys off my belt and tested each one, even though I was pretty sure which key opened that room. None of them worked because the lock was engaged from the inside. I checked the door frame for signs of forced entry. Nothing. It looked undamaged. The lock was intact. It was as if someone had locked it from inside, but there was no sound coming from the room. Now I had a strong urge to yank the door open and search the place, but the lock just wouldn't give. I stood there for a while trying to calm down. My hands were shaking. The corridor felt colder than before. I glanced around trying to see if there was any ventilation system or open window that could cause a gust of air, but everything was sealed up. The hallway was dead still. My flashlight illuminated dust motes in the air, but I didn't see any obvious draft yet. I felt that cold wind earlier right before the door slammed. I finally decided to go back to the security office and check the building layout. Maybe there was another way into that room. I found an old floor plan in a file cabinet. It showed that the room was a storage closet with only one entrance and no window. Windows, there were no vents big enough for someone to crawl through. I grabbed the master keyring again and returned to the second floor. I tried the door once more, but it was still locked tight. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe someone had snuck in earlier, tampered with the lock, and was messing with me. But the building was empty as far as I could tell, and the only door to that room was the one I was staring at. The hinges looked old and rusty, but they worked well enough to slam in my face. I thought about calling the supervisor, but I wasn't sure what to say. The door opened by itself and then locked itself from inside sounded ridiculous. Still, I wrote down the incident in my log, marking the time around 2:45 a.m. The rest of the night was painful. I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door swinging shut. I did a few more rounds, but I avoided that hallway. Part of me wanted to figure out a way to open that door, but I was honest. Lie too shaken to try prying it or forcing it open. I didn't want to see what was inside. If I managed to break in, my shift ended at 600. The morning light in the lobby was a relief. I practically ran to my car when I came back the following night. I felt nervous just stepping into the lobby. The building seemed darker, like it was feeding off my anxiety. I headed to the second floor right away, determined to check that door again in the light of my flashlight. Maybe I'd find a rational explanation. I found it locked, just like before. I tried the same keys. None worked. I pressed my ear to the door. No sounds from inside. I went back downstairs and found the head contractor's phone number in my files. I called him. He said nobody had been in that area for a while and that the locks hadn't been changed. I told him the door was stuck. He said he'd send a worker in the morning to check it out. I thanked him and hung up. I didn't mention the strange part about the door slamming on its own. I just said it seemed jammed. I spent that entire shift jumpy, turning around at every sound, checking corners, feeling my heart skip beats every time something clanked in the distance. I kept the lights on where I could, but a lot of them didn't work because of the electrical shutdown. I kept my flashlight close and tried to distract myself with my phone. Around midnight, I forced myself to do a full round. I told myself I had to be professional. I walked the first floor, everything normal. I climbed the stairs, checking my watch every few steps. The second floor was silent. The corridor looked the same. With that flickering light near the end, I stared at the locked door from a distance, shining my flashlight on it. but I didn't go near it. My pulse was racing, the hallway was freezing cold, and I felt a slight draft on my neck. I turned around fast, expecting to see something behind me, but there was nothing. Just emptiness. I walked back to the stairs as fast as I could without running. At some point, I realized my arms and neck were damp with sweat. I felt a knot in my stomach. I was relieved when dawn came and I saw workers start to arrive. I asked one of the guys if he could help open that door. He took a look. He had a big ring of keys too. None worked. He even tried using a screwdriver to pop the lock, but it wouldn't budge the guy. Shrugged and told me we'd need a locksmith or someone to remove the entire lock assembly. Then he walked away saying he'd tell the foreman. Later that same day, I got a call from my supervisor. He said they might not need a night guard anymore because the construction schedule had changed. They were going to do some structural work that required the building to be sealed for safety. I didn't argue. I was actually relieved I finished out that week, but I stayed on the first floor most of the time. I locked every door I could, didn't bother going near that corridor again. On my last night, I did one final walkthrough. I paused at the bottom of the stairs leading to the second floor. I felt the urge to go up there just to see if anything had changed, but I didn't. I just tightened my grip on the flashlight, said nope under my breath, and walked away. To this day, I can't explain what happened. That door was locked from inside. I know I secured it earlier. I know it opened by itself, and I felt a gust of cold air that had no source. It slammed shut so hard that I thought the glass would break. I didn't see any strings or wires. I didn't see a person. The door just moved on its own. I've worked plenty of security jobs since then, some in old buildings, some in new ones, but I still remember how my heart felt like it would jump out of my chest that night. I still remember the fear that crawled up my spine. I never had a logical explanation, and I stopped looking for one. A long time ago, that door was between me and something I don't understand, and I'm fine. Leaving it at that, I got off the bus and saw the small train station in front of me. The light from a single lamp glowed dimly against the concrete. I could see a short platform, a metal bench, and a few signs that looked worn out. My watch showed it was past 11 at night. I was annoyed at my own mistake because I had messed up the train schedule earlier in the day. By the time I arrived, the place was empty. There were no employees, no other passengers, and no sounds. Besides a faint hum from some distant electrical unit, I felt a slight chill roll over my arms, so I pulled my jacket closer. The bus driver had dropped me off at the entrance to the station and drove away before I could say anything else. Now I stood there wondering if I should just wait on the platform or try to find some information about the next train. That was when I noticed the ticket booth was shut and locked. The station doors were sealed. There was just that bench, the dull lamp, and the dark track stretching out in both directions. I walked over to the bench. It was an old metal bench with chipped paint. The seat felt cold, and I shifted around to get comfortable. My suitcase rested by my feet. I didn't see any trash cans or vending machines. The place had no amenities. At least none that I could spot, in that lighting the lamp above me cast a weak yellowish glow that didn't reach far beyond the bench. When I looked down the platform, I could make out a sign with the station's name, but I couldn't read it clearly from where I sat. The rest of the station fell off into darkness that seemed heavier than normal. I tried not to think about it. I'd been in quiet places before, but this felt different. There was a mild breeze, and I heard it rattling some loose piece of metal on the roof. It wasn't exactly peaceful. It felt lonely and strange. My phone didn't have a strong signal. I tried to check train schedules online, but the page wouldn't load no data. I sighed and shoved the phone back into my pocket. My plan was to catch the first train in the early morning, which I guessed might show up around 5 or 6. That meant I had about 6 hours or so to kill. Maybe I could walk around outside the station to find a taxi, but it seemed unlikely at that hour in this little town, plus the next bus wasn't coming until the next day. I decided to wait it out. I thought I might doze off if I found a better spot, but I didn't see any enclosed waiting area. Everything was locked, and it looked like nobody had used that station in a while. I leaned back, put my arms across the top of the bench, and stared at the flickering lamp. After a few minutes, I caught a faint sound. It was a steady, rhythmic tap. At first, I assumed it was my own foot hitting the bench leg, so I shifted my legs and listened again. The noise persisted. I stood up to get a better listen. The tapping stopped and the sudden quiet made my neck hair stand on end. My heart gave a quick jolt, but I tried to brush it off as nothing. I rubbed my hands together, trying to keep my nerves in check. Then I heard it again, distinct footsteps that seemed to come from the far end of the platform. Near the spot where the overhead light barely reached, they were slow and deliberate, like someone walking carefully along the concrete. I expected someone to appear, but nobody came into the light. The footsteps had a steady pattern, heel-toe, but they didn't speed up or slow down in any obvious way. I turned my head to look, and I saw nothing but the empty platform. I walked a few steps closer to the edge of the lit area. The footsteps sounded like they were about the same distance away, still hidden in the darkness. I paused, and they paused. I stepped, and they stepped. My chest felt tight. I remember thinking maybe the echo of my own steps was bouncing off some weird angle in the station, creating an illusion, but the pattern sounded off like there was a fraction of a second lag. It wasn't a perfect echo. I tried a little experiment. I stood still for about 10 seconds. My breathing was shallow, and I felt my pulse in my temples. No footsteps came. The station was completely quiet. Then I took one step forward. Sure enough, I heard another step, maybe 2 steps away from me. It sounded like it came from that same dark area. I leaned forward, squinting into the gloom, but there was absolutely nothing to see. My heart started pounding harder, the hair on my arm stood up. I could even feel sweat building up under my collar. I swallowed and listened some more. No movement, no footsteps. I backed away until I was closer to the bench again. My eyes darted around, scanning for anything or anyone. There were no signs of life. The bench was just as I left it, my suitcase still resting against it. The lamp flickered and I cursed under my breath. I didn't want that light to go out. I decided to sit down again, keep calm, and test a theory. I waited a few seconds, then I tapped my heel against the ground. Immediately, I heard a single tap in the distance. I tapped 3 times, and I heard 3 faint taps echoing back. It felt like I was playing some bizarre call and response, with an invisible presence. I realized my breaths were coming out short. My mouth felt dry. I looked around, searching for any sign that this was a prank. Maybe a station worker or a local kid messing with me, but I saw no movement at all. The footsteps never moved out of the darkness. They stayed at the same distance. I began to worry about how the night might unfold. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck with some stranger lurking around. I didn't know if they were harmless or waiting for a chance to confront me. I decided to break the tension. I stood up, cleared my throat, and walked down the platform toward the dark area. My footsteps felt loud on the concrete, each one echoing in that deserted station. Sure enough, I heard the matching footsteps. They seemed to retreat as I advanced, maintaining the same distance. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" My voice echoed, but there was no response. Besides that steady pattern of steps, I walked until I reached the edge of the lamp's glow, and I stopped. My eyes tried to adjust to the dark, but I couldn't see much. There was just the faint outline of the platform's end, some gravel and the tracks disappearing into the night. The footsteps halted. I felt my palms sweating, and I noticed a slight tremor in my fingers. I took a deep breath and stepped one more time into the dark. No responding footsteps this time. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. The wind kicked up a bit, and I felt a light breeze graze my face. I stood there, heart pounding, and then I stepped back into the light. I felt a bit shaky, like my body couldn't decide whether to fight or run. I turned around and went back to the bench, rubbing my palms on my pants. My brain churned with possibilities. Maybe I was imagining things, but those sounds were too clear to be a trick of the wind. I sat down again and tried to keep still. I glanced at my watch. It was almost midnight. I figured I should wait and see if the footsteps started again. After a minute or so, I heard them, but they were softer this time, almost hesitant. They came from the same part of the platform, the far end where the darkness was thick. Each step matched my own heartbeat. In a strange, uncomfortable way, I dug my fingernails into my palms. My breathing felt shallow again. I scanned the area, but I couldn't see any shape figure or shadow. Just the platform, the tracks, and that flickering light. My mind raced with questions. Was I dealing with a person who was intentionally staying hidden, or was it something else I couldn't make sense of? I stood up and moved in a small circle, stamping my feet lightly. Sure enough, the footsteps mirrored my movements when I paused. They paused, my neck tensed up, and I felt my teeth clench. The tension in my chest made it hard to breathe. Normally, then I decided to stop completely. I placed my hands on my hips and waited. The footsteps didn't stop right away. They went on for another 2 or 3 steps and then faded into silence. It was the first time I had heard them continue without me moving that rattled me. I felt a wave of fear crawl up my spine and my hands shook a little. I tried to calm down by taking slow, controlled breaths. I looked around again, hoping to spot a security camera or an emergency phone. Nothing. The station was too small for that kind of infrastructure. I guess the only technology I saw was a small electrical box on the wall near the ticket booth. I cursed under my breath, feeling trapped. My best option was just to wait for the train, but who knew what might happen? In the next 5 or 6 hours, I thought about leaving the station altogether and walking back to the main road, but that felt risky. I had no idea if there were any open businesses or if it was just empty roads all the way back. Also, I was worried that if this was a person messing with me, maybe they were waiting in the dark outside. I forced myself to focus on something practical. I remembered that the train sometimes had schedules posted on the walls. I got up and walked to the bulletin board near the locked station entrance. The footsteps seemed to follow, but I ignored them as best I could. My heart thumped in my chest. The schedule on the board was old and faded. I could barely read the print. It looked like the next train might arrive around 5 in the morning, but I couldn't be certain. I rested a hand on the wall, trying to steady myself. The footsteps had stopped again. Silence pressed in around me, and I felt the weight of it in my ears. After checking the schedule, I turned back to the bench. My shoes tapped against the concrete, and I noticed the footsteps didn't restart. Right away, I reached the bench, sat down, and waited 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Nothing. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a single tap, as if someone dropped a small object on the ground. It came from somewhere near the bench. I looked around, bending forward to see if something had fallen. I saw nothing. The tension in my stomach twisted harder. I felt a nervous ache behind my eyes. I kept scanning the darkness, expecting to see someone step forward. Nobody appeared. My breathing got heavier, and I felt a tightness in my throat. I told myself to be logical, but each new sound chipped away at my composure. I grabbed my suitcase and set it on the bench beside me. I felt better knowing I could snatch it up and run if I had to. I also checked my phone again, hoping maybe a signal had popped up still. No reception. The little symbol on my screen showed one bar that flickered away as soon as I tried to place a call. A few minutes went by without any more footsteps or taps. I let myself relax just a bit. My shoulders sagged and I rolled my neck to relieve some of the tension that was when I heard another noise. It wasn't footsteps this time. It sounded like a quiet scraping, like something dragged lightly over the ground. I leapt up, my heart hammering. The sound stopped as soon as I stood. I edged toward the far side of the platform, keeping my eyes on the darkness. The station felt colder than before. My nose was slightly numb. My fingers felt tingly. I reached the end of the lid area. The scraping started again, but it was too faint to pinpoint. I called out, "Is there someone here?" My voice cracked. No answer. I moved back to the bench, grabbing my suitcase handle. I decided I'd stand near the middle of the platform so I could see as much as possible in every direction. The lamp above me flickered again. My breath caught in my throat. If the light went out, I'd be standing in total darkness. That thought sent a rush of adrenaline through my body. My legs felt jittery. I kept checking the sky, hoping for a sign of dawn. It was still pitch black, and the moon was behind a thick layer of clouds. I stood there alert for several minutes. I heard no more footsteps or scraping. The station was silent except for the occasional wind gust. After a while, I lowered my guard. Slightly, I told myself I might have dozed off or let my imagination run wild. But deep down, I knew those sounds were real. They were too crisp to be a figment of my mind. I tried to reason that it could have been an animal, maybe a stray cat walking around, but that didn't match the pattern I had heard. Time dragged, my back started to ache, and my legs felt stiff from standing. I placed my suitcase on the ground and sat on it. At least that let me be ready to move quickly if I had to. The station remained still now, and then I felt a shift in the air like a slight breeze, but that was it. My mouth was dry and my stomach growled. I had no food or water with me. I kept glancing at my watch. Each minute felt like an hour. At some point, I closed my eyes for a second, trying to rest. Then I heard a clang from somewhere behind me, like metal hitting metal. I whipped around so fast I nearly dropped my phone. I didn't see anything. The clang didn't repeat. I listened for footsteps, but there were none. I got up and paced around, feeling the rough surface of the concrete under my shoes. My heart was still racing, but I tried to keep my cool. The flickering lamp was the only comfort I had. I patted my pockets to make sure I had everything. My wallet was there. My phone was in my hand and I had my keys. I couldn't do much else but wait. Every few minutes I looked down the tracks, hoping to see train headlights in the distance. The horizon stayed dark. Eventually the sky began to shift. It started as a barely noticeable gray at the very edge of the horizon. Then it became a lighter shade and I could see the outlines of buildings in the distance. My watch read just after 5 in the morning. I exhaled in relief when I heard a soft rumble on the tracks. Within a few minutes, a train horn sounded faint but clear. The overhead light was still flickering and my nerves were still on edge, but I felt a glimmer of hope that I could finally leave this place. I looked around one last time, scanning the platform. It was empty. No shadow or figure, no tapping, no scraping, nothing. The train pulled in and I felt like I could breathe again when the doors opened. I stepped inside and found a seat near the window. My body was tense and my pulse still throbbed in my ears as the train started moving. I stared out at that tiny station getting smaller behind me. I couldn't see anything unusual, just a deserted platform with a dim lamp. Yet the memory of those footsteps stayed with me and I felt a lingering chill in my chest. I shifted in my seat and tried to relax, but my heart was still beating fast. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, so I gripped my knees and took a few deep breaths. A couple of other passengers on the train barely noticed me. They were either too tired or too preoccupied to pay attention to some tense guy looking over his shoulder. I tried to think of a rational explanation for what had happened. Maybe there was a drifter in the shadows following me for some reason, but then deciding to back off. Maybe the station had an echo effect I'd never encountered before, no matter what I told myself. I knew what I heard, the sound of those footsteps matching mine. Stopping when I stopped, then continuing without me at the end. That was the detail that kept looping. In my head, by the time I reached my destination, the sun was fully up. I grabbed my suitcase and headed off the train. The platform at this bigger station was bustling with commuters. Rushing around, it felt almost surreal after the emptiness of the previous station. I took a moment to compose myself before I went to find a cab. My shirt was damp with sweat and my back felt knotted. I couldn't shake that leftover tension, but at least I was around people. At least I wasn't alone on some dark, isolated platform. I still don't have a solid EXP explanation for what happened back there. I keep replaying the steps in my mind, hearing them in the distance, matching them with my own stopping, and then hearing them continue. All I can say is it happened and it felt real. I felt that fear in my bones. Even now when I think about it, my skin crawls. Maybe it was just a trick of sound or my mind playing games. Or maybe there was someone lurking around that station enjoying a twisted way of spook. A lone traveler, I can't be sure, and I'm not eager to go back there and investigate. All I know is that I spent hours on that station platform fighting the urge to run away, all because of those footsteps that made no sense. The memory still clings to me, and I don't think I'll forget it anytime soon. If anyone ever asks about odd experiences during travel, that station is the first thing that comes to mind. I have no plans to return, and that's really all there is to it. I first noticed something was off in my basement when I went down there to look for some old tools. The light fixture on the ceiling gave off a weak glow and the corners were always in shadow. I never used to pay attention to that mirror against the wall. It was just there, left by the previous owner, too big and heavy to move. But the day I caught a glimpse of something that didn't belong my gut. Twisted, I saw furniture that wasn't in my basement. There was a rocking chair, and I swear I saw a figure sitting on it, moving back and forth in a slow rhythm. It vanished when I turned around, but the image stuck in my mind. That's when everything began to change. I'm a straightforward guy. I don't read scary books or watch many horror movies, but something about that reflection disturbed me. I decided to test it right away. I moved a stack of boxes in front of the mirror, wanting to see if the reflection would match. The real basement had those boxes stacked against the wall. When I looked in the mirror, though I didn't see the boxes, I saw a rocking chair in that exact spot. A figure sat there with its back slightly turned, shoulders, hunched arms resting on the chair's armrests. The rocking motion was slow, almost gentle. I froze staring at that shape, trying to pick out details. The figure had a dark jacket or maybe a sweater. Its hair, if it had hair, looked black, but I couldn't see a face. Then it lifted a hand like a slow wave. My neck tightened and I felt my pulse thumping in my ears. I walked away. I tried to calm myself upstairs, leaning against the kitchen counter, feeling my hands tremble. The rest of the house felt normal. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I could see the sun shining through the window. Everything was in its place except for the feeling that something was waiting for me down there. My heart felt heavy, but I had to be sure maybe my mind was playing tricks, so I went back. I took a deep breath and forced myself to flip on that weak basement light again. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw the mirror right where it always was, tilted slightly forward. Leaning against the wall, the stack of boxes still blocked the wall in real life, but in the mirror's image, there was only the rocking chair. The figure didn't move. I stepped closer. My shoes made a scraping sound on the rough cement floor. I noticed a strange hush. Even the old pipe seemed quieter. The figure started rocking again, a soft creaking that made my skin crawl. It felt like the sound was leaking through the mirror. I walked around the mirror, checking its backside. I ran my hand along the frame, feeling for any gaps or hidden compartments. It was just wood and glass covered in dust. No wires, no screens. Nothing that made sense as an explanation. The reflection showed a room like mine, but not identical. The walls looked darker, and I saw shapes of furniture that didn't match anything. I owned the only clear item was that rocking chair. I tried to move the mirror to see if the reflection would change. The mirror was heavy, so I just tilted it a bit, keeping my hands on the sides, bracing myself. The reflection changed angles too, but the chair and the figure remained there. The figure adjusted its head as if looking right at me. I felt a chill wash over my arms and neck. I dropped the mirror back against the wall, then backed away, breathing faster. I spent the rest of that day pretending the mirror wasn't there. I tried watching TV in the living room. I tried going outside to clean up the yard, but every time I let my guard down, I pictured that figure lifting its hand at me. My stomach felt tight. My legs felt restless by evening. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to figure out what was going on. I grabbed a flashlight and a small crowbar, although I had no plan. I told myself I was just checking the basement for leaks or something practical in reality. My mind kept cycling through questions. Is it a ghost? Is it some trick of my eyes? Is the mirror cursed? I had no clue, but I needed to do something. My footsteps down the stairs felt heavier than usual, like the air itself pushed down on me. The basement. Light flickered for a second when I pulled the chain, but then it stayed on. The reflection was there. Again, the figure was in the same spot, sitting still. The rocking chair wasn't moving. I walked up to the mirror and stared straight at the figure. It felt like I was challenging it. Somehow the figure lifted its head, and I saw a hint of a face, pale and blurry. I couldn't tell if it was male or female. It slowly raised its right hand and waved again, a gentle side-to-side motion of the wrist. My heart pounded so hard that my vision felt shaky. My palms were slick with sweat, and I adjusted my grip on the flashlight. I reached out and touched the mirror's surface. The glass was cold. I pressed a bit, but it felt solid. I pulled my hand back and looked at my fingertips. Expecting some sign of condensation or something strange, they were just cold. I bent down to peer into the corners of the mirror, hoping to see the reflections. Edges warping the image stayed consistent, showing that other basement. The figure's head tilted like it was curious. My arms got goosebumps. I could feel the hairs on my neck prickling. I let out a shaky exhale and stood up straight. I stepped back, raised the crowbar, and decided I would tap the glass. I gave it a light knock, half expecting the glass to shatter or something to happen. The figure didn't move. The reflection didn't. Ripple, it stayed the same. I knocked again a bit harder. The sound echoed around me. That's when the figure slowly reached for the armrest and started rocking again, forward and backward. The same even pace. I heard a faint squeak or creak. It almost felt like it was in the basement with me, though I couldn't pinpoint the exact direction of the sound. I couldn't stand it anymore. I left the basement, my legs felt stiff and my chest felt tight upstairs. I locked the door leading down to the basement. It was a flimsy lock, just a basic doorknob lock, but it gave me a tiny sense of control. I ended up sitting in the living room with all the lights on, tapping my foot and checking the time on my phone. My mind kept replaying the rocking motion. I couldn't figure out what the figure wanted or what it might do. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that slow wave. I didn't sleep well that night. I woke up several times, sweating and gasping, convinced I heard a creaking sound coming from below. But whenever I listened carefully, the house was silent, except for the normal hum of the heater and the slight rattle of the air ducts in. In the morning, I felt groggy and tense. My muscles were sore from how rigid I had been all night. I decided to return to the basement in the daylight, thinking that maybe sunlight would make everything less terrifying around midday. I unlocked the basement door. The steps creaked under my weight as I went down. I had my flashlight and crowbar again. The mirror was still there, leaning against the wall with those dusty edges and that dim reflection the figure was rocking. I couldn't see its face in detail, but I sensed it was waiting for me. I took a few steps closer, feeling that jittery sensation in my stomach. Then I stopped. The figure stopped rocking. It turned its head toward me. It slowly stood up from the chair, its outline shifting in the reflection. My breath caught in my throat. I saw it stand, and then I couldn't see the chair anymore. The figure was closer to the glass in that other space. As if it had stepped forward, it looked like it was about the same height as me. It extended a hand forward, palm facing me, almost pressing it against the mirror on its side. I felt a freezing chill run through me. I stepped back and accidentally kicked a box. My breathing went shallow and I gripped the crowbar so tight that my knuckles hurt. I didn't want to see what would happen if I stayed. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the mirror. The figure stayed in place, hand against the glass. Head tilted. It didn't follow me, at least. Not in the reflection. I reached the staircase and hurried up, my chest thawing with fear. I left the light on down there and slammed the door shut at the top for several days. I avoided the basement. I went to work. Came home and did my best to ignore the presence downstairs. I tried to distract myself with errands, chores, and mindless TV shows, but at night I felt a persistent pressure in my chest. Like the feeling you get before a storm, every so often I heard faint sounds below, little taps or soft scraping noises, though I couldn't be sure if they were real or if my imagination was out of control. After about a week, I knew I had to face it again. I couldn't just let that thing linger in my house one evening. I got a roll of thick plastic and some duct tape. My plan was simple: cover the mirror, seal it up, and see if that would block whatever was happening. I went down the stairs slowly, turning on every light I had. My body felt tense, but I tried to steady my breathing. The mirror sat there with the reflection. As always, at first I didn't see the figure. The chair was empty in the reflection. I took a step forward, scanning the glass. Then I noticed movement at the edge. The figure was standing off to the side, half in shadow. Its shoulders were slightly forward, as if it was peering around the corner of that other basement. I swallowed hard. My mouth felt dry. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to unroll the plastic sheet. I kept my eyes on the mirror. The figure remained in that corner, barely visible. I stretched the plastic over the glass. My hands shook as I tore strips of duct tape and fixed the sheet in place. The reflection got darker and darker as the plastic covered more of the glass. I didn't hear any sounds, but I felt like the air was thick, making it harder to breathe. Finally, I had the entire mirror covered. I ran my hands over the edges, smoothing the tape for a moment. I stood there waiting. I wondered if I'd feel something pushing against it, but everything stayed still. I left the basement with the mirror covered that night. I slept a little better. I still dreamt about it, but at least I didn't have the urge to check every noise over the next few days. I tried to forget. I told myself it was over. The basement felt less threatening, so I went down there to do laundry and grab tools, always avoiding that far wall. I didn't want to look at the mirror even with the plastic on it, but 3 days later I heard a noise that made my chest tighten in an instant. It was a distinct hear, like the sound of plastic ripping. I was in the hallway and I stopped in my tracks. The sound came from below. My first thought was that maybe I didn't tape it well enough. Maybe the plastic was just coming loose, but I also had a terrifying thought. Something might be pulling it off. I stood there at the top of the basement stairs, gripping the banister, my hands sweaty. I grabbed a flashlight and stood on the top step. The light switch was at the bottom of the stairs, so I had to descend in the dark until I reached it. The ripping sound was gone and the basement felt quiet. I took each step slowly, aiming the flashlight ahead. When I reached the bottom, I pulled the chain to turn on the overhead bulb. My stomach sank when I saw the plastic. It was peeled back from one side like a corner had been tugged loose. The duct tape was still stuck to the frame, but the plastic was ripped down the middle. A large vertical tear I approached with my flashlight raised. The inside of the tear showed the mirror's glass. The reflection inside was pitch black at first because the rest of the plastic was blocking the light. Then in that opening, I saw movement. The figure's face appeared near the TR, peering out as if it was looking through a gap in a curtain. I gasped and stumbled back. Almost falling over a box, I landed on one knee, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it. The figure's face was still indistinct, but I could see its eyes. They were dark, and they felt focused on me. My hands were shaking as I scrambled upright. I grabbed the nearest thing, a spare piece of wood, and swung it at the mirror. The wood bounced off without breaking the glass. The sound was loud, and I winced, half expecting shards to fly everywhere, but the mirror stayed intact. That face didn't flinch. The figure just pulled back slightly, disappearing into the gloom of that other room. I stood there breathing hard, my arms tingling with adrenaline. I had no clue what to do next, so I ran upstairs and slammed the door. My hands were unsteady and my legs felt weak. I paced around my living room thinking about calling someone, but who would I call? A mirror repair service? The cops? A paranormal investigator? I ended up just standing by the kitchen sink holding a glass of water. Trying to calm myself, my shirt was damp with sweat. When I finally went back down, I was done playing around. I came armed with a hammer and a large blanket. I wrapped the blanket around the mirror, covering the ripped plastic in the process. Then I used the hammer to drive nails into the wall around it. Hooking the edges of the blanket, I wanted to bury that thing under layers of fabric and tape. My breathing was uneven, and I felt my arm muscles strain with each hammer swing every time the hammer struck. I expected something to burst out from beneath the blanket, but nothing happened. Now the mirror is completely sealed up behind layers of plastic fabric and nails. I avoid that part of the basement some nights. I think I hear rocking or a soft scraping sound, but I try to ignore it. I've thought about moving out or maybe hiring someone to haul that mirror away, but I haven't decided yet. Every time I gather the nerve to do something drastic, I remember the figure standing there looking out, raising its hand in that slow, deliberate wave. My spine tightens at the thought. I don't know what that thing is or why it's there. I only know I don't want to see it again. I keep the door locked and I keep my mind off the basement. But whenever I pass by that door, I feel a weight in my chest and I listen for noises. I haven't heard any more. tearing sounds. I haven't seen any new rips in the covering. Still, part of me worries that if I ever do see the figure again, it'll be standing on my side of the mirror. For now, I'm trying to live my life as normally as possible. I watch TV, make dinner, and go to work. But whenever I'm at home alone, I'm aware of that basement. I feel the tension in my shoulders. I keep thinking about that slow wave, the rocking chair that doesn't exist in my house, and the way the figure's face seemed to be studying me. The mirror is still down there, hidden behind thick layers I put up in desperation, but I know it's not gone. It's waiting, and I'm not sure how long I can stand living above something that watches me from a place that shouldn't exist. I don't have a neat ending for this. I'm stuck with that mirror for now, and I'm doing my best to pretend everything's fine. But every time I walk by that basement door, I feel an urge to listen, as if the figure might call out or bang on the glass. Sometimes I think about just setting the whole thing on fire or smashing it into pieces, but I'm scared of what I might unleash. If I break the glass, maybe I'll do it anyway, or maybe I'll try to get rid of it in some other way. Until then, it stays downstairs silent and covered, but very much there, and I can't forget it. I wish I could, but I can't.